right. Good morning, everyone. All right. Welcome to ATARC and FMG'S Mobility Breakfast Summit. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Christian Williams. I'm the section chief of the Wireless Mobility and ComSatcom programs at GSA. I'm also a co-chair of the Federal Mobility Group. I have to say, I'm honored and pleasure to be co-emceeing this event today with Tom Suter, the ATARC CEO and founder. Today, ATARC and FMG, the FMG group will have partnered together to bring a great day full of mobile content. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology and Academic Research Center. ATARC is a nonprofit that facilitates in collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology and modernization initiatives. They provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. The FMG Group is chartered by the Federal CIO Council and works across federal government to identify common mobility challenges, develop workable solutions, and create opportunities to share best practices. As federal agencies become increasingly reliant on using mobility and wireless services and solutions, we want to meet their needs, their mission needs, and increasingly important for federal agencies to collaborate with each other to leverage successful and proven solutions. All right, so I do want to pivot a bit and I'd like to say thank you to our partners over at Google and Now Secure who are in the back. Truly appreciate you partnering with us today for this event. Additionally, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here today and online. I know there's other places you could be right now, like in your bed, because it's super early, but we truly think you'll enjoy it today, and we thank you for coming out. All right, so we hope you enjoy it. This is going to be a very informative day, and I'd like to also say, hey, up first, we're going to introduce our visionary keynote, and it's going to be in a fireside chat manner. Larry Hale, sitting up front here. All right, so Larry is the acting Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Category Management of the Office of Information Technology category and falls within the Federal Acquisition Service at U.S. General Service Administration. Tom Suter, the ATARC CEO and founder, will be moderating this chat. Tom and Larry, the floor is yours.
This is fantastic to see everybody, and thank you to Christian. Christian, for those of you who may not know, he's a reservist in the U.S. Navy. He just was stationed in a little place called Djibouti in Eastern Africa, serving our country for a whole year, and we just got him back. He's obviously been working out and eating right, but actually, this is the first time we've actually ever met in person because you took the job after a pandemic. So, and I was just thinking back, many of you, the last mobile summit we did was in the fall of 2019. So we had the pandemic in the March of 2020. So this is really the first time we've had a chance to get back together in person. And I would definitely like to thank our partners at Google and Now Secure. They're back here. They've been good partners for a long time. We got Jesse Viscano, who's heading their Pixel group. He's been involved with mobility about as long as I have, which is pretty long. We've got Daryl Peak in the house from Google, and we're going to hear from Brian at Now Secure. That team, I've known the CEO for at least 10 years, probably like 12 or 13. So we got some good partners today. Should be fun. So I am here with Larry, and I've known Larry about 20 years. I'm like that guy now. You know, everything's like I've known you 20 years. So. And I've known some of you back here about as long. So you've been with GSA for a while now, and recently you took over as acting deputy commissioner, assistant commissioner for category management. Tell us about that role and what's involved with it.
So Tom, thank you. And thanks to ATARC and the Federal Mobility Group for putting together this event and giving me the opportunity to share with you. I'm new enough in this role, literally just this month, August of 2022. So I have my notes with me so that I can make sure I cover everything that I want to cover. But as the acting deputy assistant commissioner for category management in GSA's Office of IT category in the Federal Acquisition Service, I'm responsible for the IT subcategories. So that's hardware, software, including cloud, IT services, IT security, and the last two, IT services and IT security. My previous roles, I was actually director of those subcategories at different times, and of course, telecom. So this includes the IT schedules and our GWACs, the government-wide acquisition contracts. And of course, there's a lot of news with how well those are doing and new small business opportunities coming along with the GWACs. So agencies benefit from choosing ITC at GSA because we offer a commitment to meet customer needs, easy access to the best solutions and cost savings, and compliance with federal regulatory guidance. And just for perspective, we facilitate more than 32 billion in annual government spending on IT. And in the last year, provided about 2 billion in savings to customer agencies. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yep. How about some of your priorities for fiscal year 2023?
Well, we are working real hard on, we have a cloud special item number on the schedule, the cloud SIN. What we're trying to do with all of the executive order for improving our nation's cybersecurity, we're working on setting up something on top of the cloud SIN to improve the ease of use, to improve the ability to acquire cloud, and buy cloud the way industry buys cloud, right? So government regulations, the FAR, sometimes make it complicated to consume cloud in the way that our cloud service providers want to sell it. So we're working to try and ease that process and build in the compliance that's necessary at the same time. So watch this space for our cloud activity as we work through that. Obviously, Zero Trust, working through helping to implement the nation's cybersecurity, improving the nation's cybersecurity, Executive Order 14028. You have that one memorized. We're enhancing equity in procurement. So improving small business opportunities, supporting the President's Executive Order 14069. And we're working on rolling out pretty much anything as a service or everything as a service, call it X as a service. And always focused on improving customer experience.
Great. We've here at ATARC, one of our main thrusts, as many of you know, is the working on Zero Trust. We have a Zero Trust lab, 60 vendors in there. They say it's a marketing term. I think it's a pretty good one. And we've had some policies in that area, and everything that we're doing, either in cloud, mobile, is headed to Zero Trust. What are some of the things that you're doing? And I know this is your background, really, is the cybersecurity area.
Absolutely. So Zero Trust, Zero Trust is not a destination. Zero Trust is a constant journey. Zero Trust is change in philosophy. It's how we deal with what we have and how we protect what we have. GSA has published, in partnership with Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, our partners at DHS, we published a Zero Trust Buyer's Guide to help agencies assess where you are on your Zero Trust journey, and determine what the most important next steps are. So areas that we're focused on in support of Zero Trust include supply chain risk management, cyber supply chain risk management. So there are, we've stood up the acquisition community of practice for us for cyber supply chain risk management. We work in partnership with CISA to expand cyber requirements across all the best-in-class contracts, those at GSA and the other best-in-class contracts. We maintain the highly adaptive cybersecurity SINs, the HACS SINs, And a lot of the services necessary for zero trust, for implementing zero trust, are available on the HackSyn. In addition to that, obviously, we've included the cybersecurity maturity model certification as an option in some of our GWACs, the small business GWACs. So 8A stars, Polaris, and with that, that allows industry to opt in. And if you have a CMMC, or if you are working on a CMMC, you can include that in your offerings on the GWACs. And agencies who want to access companies who are certified in CMMC then can use those vehicles to access those companies. So we see that as certainly as a great opportunity to help improve the cybersecurity, to bake it in, not make it optional. EIS, our Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, is absolutely a model for contracting network security. And it's certainly with the theme of a conference like this, that's a huge part of it. So as I said, 8A stars, 3, and Polaris, CMMC is built into those. I mentioned earlier, we're working on the cloud marketplace and incorporating FedRAMP into that offering so that agencies can get those FedRAMP certified cloud service providers and those FedRAMP certified services. Obviously, zero trust architecture is the gold standard, but there is no single zero trust silver bullet. Mixing my gold and my silver, right? It is a journey, and we don't, getting to zero trust doesn't mean you throw out everything you have and start over on cybersecurity. The cybersecurity programs, the cybersecurity tools that you have in place, for the most part, can be built into your zero trust architecture. It's most important to assess what you have, identify your high value assets, and then work on that zero trust architecture, perhaps retooling in certain areas, but also making sure that the tools you have are used in a zero trust way so that you know who's accessing what every single time, not one time and you get in forever, but every single time. And for the most part, the CDM, the continuous diagnostics and mitigation tools that agencies already have can be used for that. They're a good foundation to build your zero trust architecture on top of.
Great, great. Any closing thoughts, maybe about mobile security?
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. You getting me going. Okay, so we've been just look at this. This is our first time together in person. You had an FMG Mobile Summit in the fall of 2019.
Yes.
And then we all used the mobility that we had, and we've been working at home ever since. And we've been working, right? So the mobility theme is vastly important. It's hugely important to how we accomplish our missions, how we deliver services to the citizens, and doing so securely. The threat environment has changed over the last 2.5, 3 years. It continues to change. But groups like this, the Federal Mobility Group, where we bring experts together from across the federal agencies and across industry, and bring our expertise together to secure the services that we have, to improve the services that we have, and to highlight those best practices that we have across government. This is the secret sauce. This is the magic. We do this better than the guys who are attacking us. So this is really important. Summits like this are vitally important.
Great.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. When I first saw the title, I thought we were going to talk about mobile breakfast, but mobile security,
Yeah.
Count me in.
Good. Well, thank you,
Thanks,
my
Tom.
friend. Good luck in the new role.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Larry Hale. Thank you, Larry. Next, we have a good friend of ours, Brian Reed. He's definitely one of the, he's been in a lot of different roles. He's the Chief Mobility Officer at Now Secure. And if you can come up to the stage, I know the title of your talk is Gone in 60 Seconds. Didn't that win an Academy Award, that Nick Cage movie? Or
Not sure about winning an
Oh,
Academy
okay.
Award. Not sure about winning an Academy Award.
Great. Well,
but
welcome.
It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good
Tom.
to see you. Yep.
It's, I made a comment earlier. It was so much fun to actually physically be in a room with a few humans. So I don't know if anybody made it to Black Hat, but Black Hat was about 80% of its normal population a few weeks ago. So if we can, is this my remote? All good and checking. This is going to go fast. So I'm going to go quick. Put on. There it goes. All right. So I just have a few minutes. You probably all remember this movie. Part of this title is actually an homage to Eugene Lederman, myself, and others who've been around since the days of BlackBerry, which was the original mobile security. And we did a road show, was it 15 years ago? I think 10 years ago, that was gone in 60 seconds. It was about stealing your data. And from BlackBerry to good technology, we were all about securing mobility. So I want to talk briefly about kind of where the world is today. So if you think about the phone in your hand, if you think about the phone your employees are carrying, pretty much everyone in our enterprise now, in our agencies, is on their own consumer device. And they're using a mixture of agency applications and consumer applications as part of driving your agency. I'll yell here if you want. Sorry, you need me there, don't you? That's fine. So if you think about those applications, if we look at what's happened in the last 2 years, these very popular commercial applications have had public breaches. Your agency may run on Slack. You might remember the iMessage 0 day last year. And so the reality is that while our agencies run on mobile, we need to recognize that there are risks in the commercial applications. And while organizations are often focusing on malware, your biggest threat is actually commercial applications that are vulnerable. For example, TurboLock Plus, the most popular door lock IoT in the United States, sends all its data to China. It knows where the lock is installed. It knows the address. It knows your user ID and password and your geolocation. I hope you have no turbo locks in your agency. You probably shouldn't be deploying them. CoronaFax, one of the popular Corona tracking applications, it actually transmits your user ID, password, and your health information unencrypted over the air using HTTP by default. You should not be using that, or your employees should not be using that either. Now, that's a consumer-provided application. There may be one coming from your government agencies. We find that 70% of commercial applications in the App Store have third-party libraries in them that are vulnerable. So this particular agency should pull this application down. We did do a responsible disclosure, fix the third-party risk library, and then repost it into the App Store. T-Smart Life. So everyone's got home IoT automation. Your agencies may be deploying IoT automation in your buildings, heat, HVAC, electric power, what have you. Here's a great example of a popular home application that is used for managing home automation, and it's got a remote code execution in it. Talk about a foreign adversary taking over something in your home or in your building. Now, none of these applications are malware. Not a single one is malware. All of them are standard commercial applications you can download from the App Store. Anybody trade crypto? I hope that you and your friends are not using the Binance application because it's got another vulnerability in it, which basically is exposed to remote attacks. Now, in the back of the room, you can see all these applications and any of the 6 million other applications in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And so what we're here to do is really share with you the information about making sure you are completing your mobile app vetting as part of your commercial strategy. What are you doing with the third-party applications that your agency is using? We powered the original app vet solution that was deployed across the federal agencies. That's now been taken down, but a lot of organizations are working with us to replace that with that real-time visibility and continuous monitoring of the app stores. So what I mean here is not looking at malware, but simply looking at what are you doing with credentials? Are the applications properly encrypting your data? Are they storing them properly on the device? Are they transmitting information properly over the air? Are there trackable employees? We work with the State Department, making sure their employees can't be tracked through the use of applications, making sure they have safe third-party libraries. I think we've beaten to death the supply chain challenge that we're all facing. Are they disabling native Android and iOS security controls? Over the years, Apple and Google have added native security controls to ensure encrypted network communication, proper use of crypto, proper storage of keys, and things like that. It is astounding how many commercial applications the developers actually disable the default security and use their own libraries for it, which is kind of insane. But you'll only know that if you're performing mobile app vetting within your agency. Now, one of the great things that has happened just recently, I'm going to expect that Eugene will probably talk about in the next panel, is we have a new program from Android called the Data Safety Program. And with data safety now, your Android applications actually have basically a label on them that describes what's being done with your data. And part of the data safety program now is an independent security verification program. So Google is now innovating in the Android marketplace and enabling Android developers to get a third-party certification that verifies that these things are done properly. All of this is using an industry standard from the OWASP mobile project or the OWASP MASVS. So as you evolve your security program, take advantage of the Google Data Safety Program and make sure you pay attention that independent security verification has been properly performed on the applications that you're choosing to use in your agency. Apple has privacy labeling, but they don't have a third-party independent verification. So what we basically have going on now is Google has started a regime that would be like the old days of the Underwriters Laboratory certification for applications using an official mechanism. So that's the commercial supply chain. What about the apps that you're building? Today, a number of our federal team are at DFIDIC down with the U.S. Air Force with Bespin talking about how to automate pipelines and how to deliver applications in a continuous ATO sort of model. And so one of the things that we have done over the past decade or so is we've worked with hundreds of organizations on trying to optimize their pipeline and identifying the different places that friction is injected into the pipeline that makes it harder to deliver secure mobile applications to meet the mission in a timely fashion. One of the great quotes from one of the federal agencies was the fact that pipelines were so slow that by the time you got ATO, you had 4 new versions built. And so how are you going to compress that ATO cycle? Well, you want to get to a continuous ATO model. And in order to get there, there's not a silver bullet, there's 5 of them. So what we have learned in conjunction with working with the Air Force as a blueprint that we're now deploying across other agencies and civilian organizations is really 5 key steps. So the first one here is using a standards-based policy where you get the agency, your development, your architects, and your security teams together to agree on a policy that will be ultimately approvable for the ATO. So begin with the end in mind. And as part of doing that, use an industry standard like the OWASP MASVS. The second step is actually to provide a little bit of proactive training. The U.S. Air Force, courtesy of a funding initiative, we've created something called Now Secure Academy. It is free training and certification for application developers and security professionals. You can go to academy.com and have your organization just run that training. And through that training, then they become smarter. Trained developers who spend 2 hours in self-training will reduce their vulnerabilities by at least 50% out of the gate, because they're taught the simple fundamentals of what they should be doing as opposed to what they should not be doing. Make sure you have automated testing integrated with your pipelines. That's where a lot of people start. As part of that, make sure you've got pen testing for the very high-risk scenarios. And then finally, monitor those apps in production. Just because build version 1.2 is safe today doesn't mean there's a new vulnerability in a third-party service or library and it suddenly becomes vulnerable tomorrow. So not only should you speed through the pipeline, you should monitor those applications in production. And so whether it's the U.S. Air Force and the Bespin program or organizations like Uber in the commercial markets, there's plenty of ways to leverage these 5 steps to really speed your DevSecOps pipeline to make it run fast. And why aren't you working with NowSecure? So I was at BlackBerry, I was at Boxtone, I was at Good Technology. I've been around mobile for a long time. I know some of you in the room, I'm recognizing your faces. And so from the perspective of working with the Federal Mobility Group and other standards bodies, NowSecure really is the trusted vendor across most of the top organizations in the world, the top tech vendors. We work with all the carriers in the United States and many of those internationally and across all the different industries. We've got some great stories to share, whether you want to talk about what we're doing inside of Bespin, what we do with AT&T. We're a certifier for AT&T FirstNet, along with all the application portfolio that AT&T delivers, same with Verizon and T-Mobile. So whether the mobile folks or the high technology folks or other industries, they turn to NowSecure. We work with about a dozen federal agencies and we're here to help. Whether you want to leverage our best practices and our blueprint or leverage our technology and expertise, we're happy to give you some help. So from the overall portfolio, we're able to bring to the table everything you need for mobile for the apps you build and then the apps that you download from the commercial app stores. We can provide you with software bill of materials, which are coming out of the White House cybersecurity order. We can monitor that commercial supply chain and third-party supply chains. We've got the expertise to help your agency stand up programs like we did at Best Ben or like we've done in many of other federal organizations. Now, part of our history is we were founded 12 years ago at the birth of the modern iPhone and the Android device. And at that point in time, we were actually funded by a SIBR to become the first mobile forensics company in the United States. And out of that mobile forensics, we evolved into mobile pen testing and building standards. So we work with OWASP, the MASVS spec lead for OWASP, one of the co-leads, works for NowSecure. And so we've been driving that standard and specification. There's some phenomenal things going on with the OWASP community and how that's been evolving to a very rigorous model. We've worked with our friends at Google, leveraging the OWASP specification on the ADA authorized lab strategy and the Google Play data safety program that I talked earlier. We also work in the IoT space. You'll notice I gave you a number of IoT examples in terms of certifying IoT applications. So we help set those standards. We help train others on how to build, work, and test with those standards. And then we help support you and your commercial enterprise, your agency enterprise, in terms of ensuring you're taking advantage of those standards to be successful. So this is just a real quick conversation. Think about the applications on your phone today. Think about, is it possible that a nation state, foreign actor, or criminals are stealing data off your phone right now? That data can disappear quickly. Make sure you're protecting your supply chain. Make sure you grow a great mobile program with the expertise and the technology to make you successful. And with that, I will yield my time. Thank you, Tom.
All right, thank you, Brian. That was a great presentation there. I know you've worked with the Federal Mobility Group, like you said, many times, and we truly appreciate it every time you speak to us. Great insight. Up next, we're gonna have our first panel of the day. Man who probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'll go ahead and introduce him anyway. Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Network. He'll be bringing his panel up. So Jason, take it away. Ready? Your turn. Yeah, I don't know if it's order.
No, whatever order you want. All right, thank you. All right. So you're saying use this one? All right, I got this one. Give me a microphone, I'm just going to talk. Tom knows better. Too many. There we go. Now it's working. Now it's working. All right. Well, first of all, it's always great to be here. Thanks to Tom, of course, Suter, and Lisa Cole, and all the folks at ATARC for inviting me. Always enjoy these events. And saying what's it, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a row we've had an in-person one. It's nice. It's nice. I don't miss the Zoom so much, but yeah, it's nice to be in person once in a while. All right. So and you'll hear later from my colleague Tom Temin, who's outside fueling up for his panel. So please stick around for his panel. It'll be a great job there too. As you heard, I'm Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Network. You can find us on federalnewsnetwork.com, of course. And if you drove in this morning and your AM radio button still works, please push it. I'm sure you have not pushed it in quite a while, but I promise you it does work. All right, so if you've seen me moderate before, you know I like to get started with a little bit of trivia, especially in person. So we're going to start with a little trivia to warm us up, make sure our coffee is kicked in. So these are trivia questions, so you need to answer the questions. And Tom, there's one that you can't answer. All right, and you can't answer one too, but you'll know that in a second. But call out your answer. It's all about participation because I love participation. I'll have the wireless mic that I'll walk around once we get to the Q&A part. And so here we go. First question. Which is higher, the percentage of users coming to federal websites through a mobile device or through their desktop? Mobile device or desktop? Yell it out. Mobile, everyone says. Wow, you guys are good. Mobile does win 54% to 43%, according to analytics.usa.gov site. A couple other interesting statistics I'll share with you. Chrome, still used by a majority of visitors, 45%. So thank you, Eugene. Safari comes in at 36%, but iOS is still preferred operating system compared to Windows, which close second, but still the preferred operating system. All right, here's the one you can't answer, Tom. How many metrics related to mobile security do agencies have to report on in their annual FSMO reports? How many? 5, or you're just raising your hand? 14. Ah, you knew this. Someone knew this. 14's right for this year, but what about next year? 0. There you go. If you've seen ATARC's letter, which I have and I wrote about last week, you'll know that there's a lot of brouhaha brewing, if you will, over the removal of these mobile metrics. So last one. All right. How many steps are there, since we're talking 5G today a little bit, in the 5G security assessment process that CISA put out earlier this year? How many steps? Are you raising your hand or are you telling me the answer again? Because you're becoming a problem. Call it out. One guy knows. Call it 5, thank you. Are you from CISA? All right, well, we know that 2022 security evaluation process developed by CISA, there are 5 for security of 5G. There's 5 steps. Identify your assessment boundary, identify your security requirements, map your security requirements to federal guidance, and assess the security guidance gaps and alternatives. Now, you can go home tonight and talk to your family and friends at dinner and press them with these statistics and data, because what else do we have to talk about these days, right? So for our panel, I've asked each of the panelists to take 3 to 5 minutes and tell you something you don't know about what they're doing around mobile security, about 5G, and about the topic itself. I don't do intros. I don't do bios. No one's going to tell you what the FBI does. If you don't know, you're probably in the wrong building and you enjoyed a good breakfast. Once we get done, I have the wireless mic. I'll walk around and hopefully get some questions. Tom, are we taking questions from online too? We'll figure that out. If we should do that. If we're not, then they can email tom.suter. All right, well, we'll figure it out. But in the meantime, you all are now on the hook for asking really good questions based on what they told you. So, Katie, you're first.
Excellent.
Tell
Can
something
you
we don't
guys
know.
hear me okay? Okay. So I think, okay, thanks. It's nice because I'm short, so I don't have to be at the podium where I can barely see over. It's really great to be in person, but I noticed there's one thing that we're lacking now that we're in person. So the last 2 speakers, when we were virtual, you could do like a +1, or you could somehow online, show support. So I'm not sure how we're going to do that in person now. I don't know if we all sit in the audience and put our hands up or like +1. I mean, I don't know, but we got to figure that out because again, the 2 speakers couldn't have, I think, sort of teed up the conversation we're going to have. So one thing that you may not know about the FBI is my role. So we have a new position. It's only a couple of years old. I am the lead for the 5G program office, and I'm co-lead with our internet governance program office. And there's a reason behind that. So to look at the way the FBI views the problem, it's all about preparing your environment. So there are 3 ways we really look at kind of all challenges, right? The first is our mission, right? How do we preserve the capability and ability to investigate and to enforce, right? Along with our mission. The second, though, is how do we keep parity? And really what I mean is superiority against our adversaries. And that's a different way of looking at it, because now you're going to be looking at leveraging technologies, right? And trying to leapfrog potentially, which is what we're doing in the FBI. And the third way is how do we protect our employees? And I think this is something probably we're all going to talk about. I know it was in the previous 2 speakers talking about how you protect your own agency. There's a whole new bevy of digital exhaust and breadcrumbs that our employees are leaving behind, even down to keeping both of your work phone and your personal phone together, always in the same geographic locations, and what that might tell our adversaries about our organization. So those are the 3 ways that we started looking at assessing what 5G, 6G, Wi-Fi 6, all of these new technologies, how they're going to impact our mission set. So we did a sort of best practices, and then we looked at and prioritized the top issues that we needed to start preparing our environment for. So I'll stop there. That's probably my 3.5 minutes. Thank you.
I'm going to ask my one logical follow-up because you opened the door, so I will walk through it.
Welcome.
You prioritize your top issues.
Yeah.
What are your top issues?
So the top
You knew
issue.
that was coming.
No, I did know
Oh.
that was coming. So there are a couple of top issues. One of those is preserving lawful access. And I think it's something we as an organization have been talking a lot about, which is we are being architected out of a lot of the capabilities. So one of the changes and the reason why we have an internet governance program, and really it's a standards development kind of organization group as well, we gained membership in the international and recognized standards development organizations. And the reason behind that is we need a view into critical and emerging technology. So in order, I guess I'm kind of putting the precursor here, is the number one priority was how do we know what's coming and what we need to prepare for? So membership in those organizations has given us really kind of two key pieces. One is we can see where the market is going. And you all, I know, have a lot more experience in the SDOs than we do as an organization. But what we're learning there is you really do have to follow where the standards are being developed, who's bringing the patents, and where the market is going, because it does change and it shifts. And unless you have a seat at the table, you're going to miss those shifts. And then the second is advocacy. So we're there to advocate for not only the FBI, but state, local, tribal law enforcement as well, to make sure that there is lawful access is preserved. Again, I think we've said this, you've heard our director, our executive assistant director for science and technology. We always say the same thing. We really aren't looking for backdoors into technology. We do come through the front door with a warrant. And so we're trying to work better with our academic, with our private sector partners in particular, to make sure that we are preserving that balance of security and then enabling privacy, civil liberties, because all of those are a part of our mission as well. So, and again, technology is the key to all of that, but we do need your help. So I probably only got to the top priority, but maybe that's okay for the start.
I think that's good for a start. It gives people questions to ask you later. All right, Eugene, from Google.
Can you hear me? Testing. Okay, cool. Yeah. Hi, I'm Eugene, part of the Android security and privacy team at Google. When we were talking to Jason, he's like, you can talk about things that are not public sector if you want. I was like, but I spent 20 years in public sector, so I kind of know the space. But so I'm part, like I said, part of the Android security privacy team. Our whole mission is to protect the 3.5 billion Android users that exist out there. We kind of focus on three key principles: defense in depth, obviously a good buzzword for government, but it starts with hardware security, isolation on the OS side, and then the cool thing is we actually layer on these additional security services provided by Google, some cool metrics. For example, we have a built-in anti-malware solution on the device, scans 125 billion apps every single day. We also provide built-in anti-phishing and scam protection. And then the next pillar is transparency. And one thing that about Android is really cool, a lot of people don't realize, Google obviously contributes heavily and builds Android. Android is an open source operating system. We actually publish every change we make into Android. We publish lots of blogs, and we actually have a really neat transparency report that my team runs, where we publish top line metrics, things around malware, device updates, and so forth. And the last thing is, obviously this panel is a great example that's working with experts in public sector and private sector. Even internally at Google, we have lots of expertise around things like identity, machine learning. And so Android takes the best of all of those things. In terms of what my team specifically, my little small team does, our whole goal is to build trust with our end users, whether that's public sector, enterprise, or consumer. And our whole goal is to do verifiable security. And what I mean by that is it really goes around working in these standards development organizations, but also certifying our products and kind of practicing what we preach. Android does build their own first-party hardware. We have a Pixel phone, but that's a very small market share for us. So our real focus is use that as a reference implementation and then try to get the broader Android ecosystem to adopt these things. And so what's really neat about that is specifically for public sector. I've been in public sector for a long time. In the past, there was a BlackBerry, as Brian had alluded to, and then there was Windows Mobile, and then there was iOS, and pretty much Samsung was the only certified Android device, right, over the years. When I first started at Google, the one thing that we focused on was we wanted to create competition, drive innovation. And so what we did is we took the Pixel device 4 years ago. We said, we want to meet the government's requirements around common criteria, FIPS, and DoD STIG. And so we worked really hard with experts. We implemented a lot of changes into Pixel, and then we ported everything back into Android open source. And what resulted in that was, fast forward 4 years, there's over 100 Android phones that are certified every year now for use. Different form factors, different, whether they're rugged or tablet and so forth. And so it's been really exciting to see, the ability to kind of drive that innovation, reduce the cost. And I think that's all I had in my notes. Oh, what was I going to say? Oh, the one thing I did want to mention is when we first started this effort, historically, these evaluations are super expensive and they priced out a lot of vendors. And one of the benefits of the fact that we were able to take this work and contribute it back and improve this for everybody was that we actually drove the cost down heavily and reduced the complexity. And so it's something that's been really exciting. I mean, we hope to continue the partnership with public sector to drive various use cases, including 5G. One actual plug I will say that we did specifically around network security in Android 12, and it got some really good press back in terms of adversarial threat. 2G downgrade attacks are still very common if you think of stingrays. And one of the things that Android introduced, and initially on Pixel, but then broadly, was the ability for the user to disable 2G on their device. So it would not downgrade except for emergency services. Other OEMs also picked it up because it was part of Android open source. And exciting for this year in the launch, hopefully we'll actually have that as an enterprise toggle. So various enterprise customers, government agencies can say, we want to disable it automatically for our end users to protect them when they're deployed or something like that. So, thank you.
All right. Couple quick follow-ups for you as well, Eugene. You mentioned the goal is to build trust with the end user, verify security. That is obviously tougher for mobile devices. For years, the thought was, well, I'm safe on my phone. And now we're seeing the attacks coming from the phone. Talk maybe a little bit about how you look at verifiable security. How do you build trust? And let's ask you to lean into the public sector side or the federal side about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in terms of, we've done a lot of studies, and what's really interesting is if you look at what like the user's hierarchy of needs, especially on phones, security is a tricky one because the average user doesn't understand what security entails. Encryption, biometrics, these are just buzzwords to end users, scam and phishing protection, right? But what they really want is that kind of a promise to say, hey, this phone is fairly secure. And one of the best ways to do that is actually build things that are standards-based and then prove those out through some kind of certification program. The US government does a really good job with that because I jokingly call it the holy trinity of certifications, but it's, like I said, NIAP with MDFPP, FIPS 140-3 now, and DoD STIG. If you meet that bar, you've gained confidence, at least with enterprise customers. Brian actually touched on from NowSecure touched on a good point as well. That's only looking at the device side. There was never really a program to certify apps. I know CISA is trying to do something for government apps, for example, but one thing that we did as a good way to kind of extend that further for consumers, and we've done some market research on this, consumers really want to know that app developers, for example, also were doing the best things that they could do to prove things out. Now, Common Criteria has a certification program for apps called the App Protection Profile, but it's very costly and it's very enterprise and regulated vertical focused. So what we did in the Google Play Store, for example, we launched this independent security review as an option using OWASP. Brian, by the way, it's MAS now. They've rebranded, not MASVS. We give developers the ability to go through this independent security review through a set of authorized labs, and now they can prove this out and actually display this as a badge in the Play Store, so that as a user, when I download an app, and it was really interesting to see that users actually, where they value that promise actually scored higher, for example, than the number of comments an app had or the number of stars an app had. It still didn't compete with price, for example. Price was still number one, but it was an interesting equalizer to make users feel safer when they're downloading that application.
All right, thank you for that. Now we'll turn to Mike from NIST.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Mike from NIST. At NIST, we have a National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence where we kind of build out reference architectures for specific use case problems. And one project that we started a couple of years ago was a 5G cybersecurity project. This was born out of our work within 3GPP, specifically the SA3 working group, so the Security Architecture Working Group. And with the advent of 5G, network functions that make up the core network are called a service-based architecture. So it really breaks out how all the different network functions work together. And so we help work in that group to standardize some of the security functions. And then we really want to build out a reference architecture for how these can be enabled. And now with how things are broken out in the service-based architecture, it really lends itself to being the 5G core network to being built on top of cloud native technologies. So utilization of virtualization technologies, containerization technologies. However, that the 3GPP standards for 5G don't actually address that underlying infrastructure that all the network functions run on top of. So leveraging our NIST expertise and experience with data center security, cloud security, we're trying to build out a holistic 5G secure or trusted infrastructure. So in this project, we've collaborated with 12 industry partners, from hardware vendors like Dell, Intel, AMI, to telecoms vendors like Nokia, AT&T, and T-Mobile, and network security vendors like Palo Alto and Cisco, to really build a holistic solution where we're going to build trust into the underlying infrastructure that all of the 5G network functions run on top of, including all the way to the radio access network, or the RAN. And then apply all of the optional and required 5G network function security controls. So in this sense, we can show how a network provider could build out this trusted and secure infrastructure, as well as demonstrate people who consume the 5G networks what sort of optional features they can ask for their providers to turn on, how that they can leverage them to make sure that once their phone connects to the network, they know the security that the whole network is providing behind that. We're currently building out this infrastructure. We should have our network up and running in like a month or two and be able to make calls across it. And once that's actually done, we're going to try to build on additional use cases in the future. Some things we have identified in one of our publications is like secure slicing is a big deal. We can show, our goal is to be able to show how you can request a secure slice and then piece together all these different infrastructure and 5G security features that really enable that, and then give some sort of attestable verification or proof to the end user how that's being set up. So one of the end goals of this project is not only document our network design and architecture, but then also map that to the NIST cybersecurity framework and the 853 control sets, or any other relevant telecom standards. So you can see what level of security you have if you were to adopt the reference architecture that we implemented in the lab.
All right, we're going to come to you all with questions, so start thinking of them. Before I do that, Mike, I got the one big follow-up. You answered actually most of my questions, but let me start with the one thing, that's secure slicing. It sounds pretty obvious what it is, but maybe define it a little bit. And the idea seems to be that I'm going to send this packet or this set of data, and I want to make it more secure than maybe typical. Walk me through it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And just caveat, this is
Yeah.
one of our future capabilities we want to build in. But so the idea of a secure slice is your organization can kind of request its own specific network slice. So it'll pretty much have its own virtual mobile network where it'll be a specific carve out. So let's say, no, I don't want to specify any mobile network providers, but say provider A has its general publicly available subscription option. Your agency or your organization requests its own special slice where all that traffic will be separated and segregated from the general offering, and you can specify specific security features you want on your own network slice.
All right, I'm going to go around the poll here. Any questions right now? Oh, there we go. Right in the back. Thank you. You always need someone to break the seal, and you're going to walk to me even. All right, I'm going to hold the microphone though, so tell them who you are.
Hi, Ezra with Zimperium. We're a mobile security company, and my question is for Katie. I've heard from a couple of different agencies that leadership is only concerned with security mobile devices for outside United States travel. Just curious if that's something you've experienced, and if so, how does that fit in with your mission of driving lawful access?
Yeah, so if I hear you right, because I want to make sure I answer to the question, are we prioritizing mobile device security both domestically and internationally? Is that?
Yes, that's a good summation. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. So absolutely we are. And boy, there's a whole lot of places we could go with that, right? Because there's the internal to our organization, and then there's the way that we're trying to protect, right, and actually accomplish our mission. So let me, I guess, start with one of the real challenge I think we have in the mobile space is it still comes down to the user. So we talked about all of the systems. There's a lot of new tools. There's new standards for all of the security provisions. But one of the things that we still need to be very focused on is upskilling and providing awareness and sensitizing the user. So I'm only going to use this example because I think it's ubiquitous, meaning it's domestic and international. And for us, that line is the same. In other words, we look to protect equally. It may just mean we have a different set of partners domestically than we do internationally, but we're in both areas. But let me get back to sort of the user, because again, this is one of these international norms. So all of the metrics on how people are accessing the internet, for instance. So you gave some metrics on how we, access data, but internationally, when we first joined the Internet Governance Forum a few years ago, they were putting out a statistic, and I think this was like 4 years ago now, that about 50% of the global population accesses the internet via mobile. Last year, I looked at that figure and I, reviewed it, and it was up over 80% of the world's population accesses the internet through mobile. So that tells us a lot about, it's great we're putting all of the emphasis on securing. And again, finding that line between productivity and accessibility and security. And I think that is a challenge for everyone. But two specific threats, because you did ask me earlier too about the threat environment. I think there are two challenges, things that people just take for granted, they don't think about. I'll use my kids, I'll throw them under the bus, my high schooler who says, what do I really have to worry about? So China's looking at my data, of course, that from where I come from, as you all know, that makes me just crazy. But I said, well, you should be concerned about your money. You have a checking account and a savings account. At least I can get you on, preserve your money to spend on stuff, right? So it's a couple of things. I watch as I go to the airport, folks take their USB cord and they put it right into the power charger at the hub at the airport. That is one of the most risky things you can do. The exploits are renowned. We have a public service announcement. I am happy to orient you to that, warning against that and showing actually where exploitations, how easy it is to then get into the system, put the malware, and then really go right to your key logging or other things, and they've got your bank account, right? Because everybody likes mobile banking too. So we're putting all that on the phone. The other one, and it's a new term I just learned, so I'm very proud to use it on this stage, is smishing, which is the SMS phishing. So again, go back to those statistics. If over 80% of the global population is accessing the internet through their mobile device, it's almost too easy. And we just heard there are a couple of federal agencies being spoofed. One of them does your taxes, for instance. They send, of course, the link to your, phone. It's a text now and says, penalty of you're going to be arrested or fined if you don't click on this right now and update all your information. It is remarkable that phishing, and we all know this from the statistics from the Internet Crime Complaint Center, for instance, IC3, they put out an annual report. If you haven't accessed it, please do. But still, phishing remains the #1 threat. So I only bring that into the mobile space because that also looks like it's going to be a very top threat there as well. I hope that I addressed, I know I went off into a tangent. I'm hoping I got to the heart of your question.
Yes, thank you.
Gene or Eugene or Michael, you want to address the security challenges going out of the country? Because I know the Federal Mobility Working Group has put out some recommendations around that. When was it? Was it 2021 maybe? Anyways, anything you want to add right now? And we got another question.
I would follow up with what Katie said. In any security model, the user is always the weakest link. I think there was a common error. What is it? 1D10T was the error, that code that most people gave out. In terms of this, I think I'd like lots of acronyms here, but I like to think of policy, education, and technology. Treat users like your pets. And so the policy side, you want to make sure that they know what they can do and what they can't do. There has to be accountability. On the education side, I think actually that's very undervalued, how much user education. And I think Bob Lord actually talked about this a lot in his little checklist that he did for the DNC. The average user might not care so much about their government system that they maintain, but they would care much more about their personal stuff because it's impacting their financial, to Katie's point, everything else. If you can educate the user on the benefits on the personal side, they might actually apply that hygiene on their work side as well. So that education piece is really important. And then the third piece, of course, is the tools. And, part of this is how much you can provide built in to be proactive in protecting those users so they don't make those mistakes, because we're all humans after all. We make mistakes all the time. And a couple examples of that, the USB data signaling example, shameless plug because it was a feature that I drove, but on Android, we actually enabled USB data. We created a toggle for enterprise customers to disable USB data signaling for exactly that reason, because at the end of the day, they might not be thinking about it, even though they've been trained about it. There's a policy that says don't do it. They might still do it. And you want to have that technology as kind of like the catch-all fail-safe. In terms of international, I mean, I think this is where especially, and I will defer to the colleagues here on the cellular side, but that's the part that's really critical, is that you're roaming so many networks, you can fall victim very quickly to rogue base stations and stuff like that. And good segue to you. Then.
Yeah, thank you. That's just one point I wanted to bring up. When you get to international and roaming between networks, there is a standard security function called the SEPP or SEP, the Security Edge. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's pretty much a firewall between different mobile networks that you have to, the mobile network operators can specify what exactly can transfer between networks. So maybe in the future, there's a way to block phishing SMSs from one network to the other.
All right, thank you all. Any other question? Stand up, tell them who you are.
My name, excuse me, my name is Jim Payne with Security. The Enduring Security Framework Organization, which is co-chaired by NSA, DHS, CISA, and also ODNI, have identified 13 5G threat vectors. I want to hear the reaction or what you're doing or reacting to that, the FBI, NIST, or even Google as well. Jim Payne.
You guys go first.
Yeah, I'll look at each other.
That's not me. That's
That's
not an area of my practice area. We have other folks who could cover that in the future, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the specific threats or vulnerabilities are. Maybe we can talk afterwards and I can see exactly what you're referring to. But in our reference architecture, part of our documentation is threats, vulnerabilities, and mitigations that we're trying to achieve with our reference architecture at the NCCOE. So if I can see the specific threats and vulnerabilities, maybe we can take that in consideration as we build this out and apply different security capabilities to address some of them.
Yeah, so absolutely, we're looking at all of those. Maybe let me pick a different one that we haven't talked about, because we talked, I think, a lot about sort of cybersecurity and what we're doing on the kind of network piece, and there's a lot to that. Let's talk supply chain. So there's a lot we're doing as an organization, both internally, by the way, with our own supply chain risk management program and assessment, but we're also sharing a lot of that information out. So here are the types of checklists, here's the way we approach it. But I think maybe one thing to key in on specifically with 5G is network virtualization and software-defined networking and software as a service. That is one where we are putting a lot of attention, because I think the challenge is we work with our FCC colleagues in particular, you know about the bans on Huawei and ZTE, but the challenge is when we start looking at open radio access network, which is a great option for diversifying the market, but there's a challenge there, which is now you have to look at where's the source code coming from. So as we look at software, how many levels back in the software supply chain do we need to look, and how are we validating where the vendors are coming from? Where's the source code coming from? So that's just one of the 13 areas, but I thought I'd give a different angle. But yes, we are following that and we are addressing, and we're doing a lot of public service announcements and products that were posted to our website and through our InfraGard chapters.
Can I touch on that point as well? And as part of our infrastructure security or cloud security that we're building into our architecture is enabling trust in the underlying infrastructure that all of the network functions run on top of. So we're using a hardware root of trust to do boot time measurement of all of the servers that make up the entire data center. And from that, you can create an allowed list for which servers are still in that trusted state in your environment, and then extend that into your network function orchestrator, whether it's like a VMware vCenter server that's deploying virtual machines or a Kubernetes controller. You can control which physical servers your network functions will run on top of. And part of that will take into consideration the trust status of that server that it's deploying on top of.
Just add on the mobility side, obviously, root of trust is a critical thing, and attestation services are something both governments use as well as consumer apps like Netflix to make sure you're not connecting and using, watching movies or somewhere in other regions and stuff. So I think root of trust and attestation is a critical underpinning. I mean, obviously, I think NCC would cover as a whole thing on just that aspect of it. And then in terms of supply chain, one thing that I think kind of resonating with Now Secure talked about earlier as well. On the mobile side, it's software development kits, right? That's a really big thing. On the Android side, on the Google side rather, we actually have something called the SDK index, and we're actually now working with developers because 90% of apps use one or more SDKs, and when there's a vulnerability in a single SDK, that could impact billions of users because that SDK is so broadly used. And so it was important to us to start thinking about indexing top SDKs and making sure that they meet the needs of their developers in terms of patching vulnerabilities, not declaring too many unnecessary permissions and so forth. So kind of broad spectrum when you think of supply chain.
Okay, another question? No, I have one. All right. Think about it. I want to go back to the supply chain piece because I think that's obviously fascinating. We heard Larry talk about some communities of practice, some not just supply chain risk management, but cyber supply chain risk management. So let me maybe ask Katie to start on this one. Is the FBI says you work in a lot of standards, working with a lot of groups. What's the supply chain conversations like? There's a whole move, obviously, we know about zero trust and the SBOM, and everyone loves that acronym. But what's the discussion like for the FBI as you talk to your counterparts, either in law enforcement or just in the standards group that you work with?
Yeah, so I think it's probably twofold. And this is something I always like to describe, that my job is stratactical, which is one part strategic, right? Looking at these larger technology policies all the way down into tactically and operationally how we're actually applying the technology. So we're really spanning the gamut there internationally on specifically the supply chain side. So it's one part of assessing and where we have threat-based intelligence and information on specific vendors or areas where vendors are coming from, and looking at the trust side of that from a security perspective. We're trying to share that out, right? Public, as I said, public awareness. We have campaigns. We're trying to share that with our other colleagues in the US government. We're trying to take the flash to bang from identifying vulnerabilities or untrusted, because it's not just coming from two main companies. I know that's what is in the news, but there are other aspects of untrusted vendor offerings or just untrusted applications where vulnerabilities are identified. And so we need to make sure that we're looking at all of that with regard to the supply chain, not just looking again at specific companies. We're looking at also specific vulnerabilities. And we're not only looking at that for our protect mission, because we're going to be involved in investigating and hopefully prosecuting where there's a criminal aspect of this, but also for our own operations. And so we're trying to get, I think, really focus on sharing what we're learning internally and the best practices and our supply chain risk management assessments where we're identifying these vulnerabilities and from specific vendors or just again with specific technologies, and then share that out. And so it's again a focus of ours, what we're learning internally, what we have access to, where we're developing threat information, making sure then we're turning that into something actionable for you, the consumers and the people that we protect.
Eugene or Mike, do you want to jump in on the security? I mean, the open source, people may hear open source and go, oh, I don't want to do open source. I mean, there's still, unfortunately, that fear of it, especially in the public sector. How do you all kind of address that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. The closed source, open source is a very good debatable topic because obviously Android is open source. You can see all the commits. And I mentioned our aspect on transparency. And I think the benefits of open source, and you can see this quite a bit in the Android ecosystem side, you get a lot of academia, research community actually pressure testing everything that we build. And I think that's actually a benefit, because what that really means is we have a broader coalition of partners providing security for the greater good, in this end user community, where oftentimes, if something is closed source, there's this concept of security through obscurity where you think something is safe, but really you don't really know. And then it's the adversaries that are kind of holding some interesting information that they just, leverage through a 0-day or whatever. And a lot of this, you can actually see some interesting metrics around this, because if you look, there's a lot of websites that do like 0-day aggregation, and you'll be surprised to see, as an example, shameless plug on the Android side, Android is actually smaller in that big pie chart than some of the other leading operating systems, and it is open source. So I think it's a good debate, and there's lots of pros and cons on both sides, but we obviously lean towards the open source is beneficial.
Right. And there's no like silver bullet between closed source, open source. So as long as you have like a good cyber hygiene practice in place, you're doing your scanning, your inventorying, so you can remediate and patch things as they come up, which is all good. Also, a lot of the open source things, like for instance, Kubernetes, like the container orchestration system, a lot of security folks have been working in that open source community to build in specific security tooling or APIs to integrate other things in there. So when you deploy something like that, or a vendor productizes it and they use all those open source APIs and code, you inherit that from the get-go.
All right, we have another question here. Kevin, I'm gonna ask you to come forward. So they yelled at me about the speaker, not to get near the speaker. Don't touch my microphone. Go ahead but tell me who you are.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Gallo from GSA. And yeah, I have a question. This is actually from Michael. It goes back to your opening remarks. And in our warm-up questions, we'd heard mentioned about CISA's guidance there for 5G evaluation process. 5 steps, is that right? Five steps. And that's, I mean, it's a great read. And CISA's also done some other publications regarding 5G cloud services security. And then I'm hearing about what your work doing with your lab effort and the reference architecture. So is there a direct tie-in with that, any of those efforts, or is it just like an indirect tie-in? Because I can certainly see how agencies could use the evaluation process and then actually reference your reference architecture once it's developed.
Right. And I have seen some of the CISA outputs. I don't remember all the details off the top of my head, but I do recall seeing some of that infrastructure security and roots of trust language in there, which is great. I don't know if we work directly with CISA to help put that out, but there's definitely tie-ins. I think we'll probably end up referencing it and hopefully be able to get CISA to maybe reference our work as well, since we're implementing it in the lab as well. But I think there's definitely tie-in there.
And I'll expand the question for Katie as well. FBI and the CISA relationship has gotten much closer over the last 3-5 years. How are you? Do you have a 5G / governance relationship, for lack of a better word, with CISA?
Yeah, we do. We have a very close working partnership. In fact, DHS CISA, maybe just one example of this, is they brought us in. They were doing an initiative with state, local, tribal partners across the US by region. And so we would give a presentation, a co-presentation with DHS CISA on that to give the FBI's aspect of it. But we're working very closely with CISA on a lot of the threat base, a lot of the vulnerability, a lot of the targeting of critical infrastructure. We're working very closely, even from an investigative point of view. Maybe one other thing I would just give a plug for here is that we are creating a science and technology center in Huntsville, Alabama, which some of you have probably heard about. We're putting 5G test environment in there, not duplicating anyone else's other efforts. In fact, we're leveraging that. And that's somewhere where a partnership with DHS CISA, with other US government, with NIST, with others, DOE, for instance, that's really opening things up for us and really trying to, again, we have to be able to assess our own capabilities and, in a little bit more of a private setting, I would say, but that's somewhere where we're very open. We're partnered with many of you actually sitting in this room from the private sector, from academia and so on. Just thought I'd give a little bit of awareness to that effort.
And just to add on top of that, I just actually was in touch with the folks at the Idaho National Lab, and they have a ribbon cutting coming up for their 5G range as well. So I think you're starting to see these 5G test beds come up. It's great to hear. Obviously, I think we've heard about the FBI one, but obviously energy, I'm sure. I think NIST has one too, probably, or if you don't, you will. We want to remind folks who are listening virtually that you can ask questions. We do have someone monitoring questions. Are we doing the chat, Alyssa? Is that what we're doing, or just the Q&A part? So you still have a few minutes left in this panel. So if you do have a burning question, please send it as soon as possible. In the meantime, I'll go back to the live audience. Anybody have questions? And there we go. A guy who knew every answer to my question. I think he may have hacked my computer. Don't touch my microphone. All right. Tell me who you are.
I'm Cyril Sen from DHS and GSA, supporting the FMG. And my question is probably for Katie. You mentioned you have agents that are overseas. They take their phones. Sometimes they use their personal phones, maybe the GFE. My question is, they use sometimes WhatsApp, Facebook for business talks and communications. Should that conversation be logged? Do we have that kind of capability? Because there's sometimes business discussions, right? Where's my visa? What happened to this guy's visa if it's State Department? So there's a lot of discussion about text messaging, in the news, but not political. But I'm just wondering if agencies that have overseas staff, should they be logging conversation if it's using social media?
Yeah, so let me be careful about what I share, because I am not a core member of our mobile device management, right, actual team who is executing that every day, or our mobile application management team that's managing that every day. So I'm not sure what we publicly issued on what our employees use and don't use in the app space, but let me at least take a stab at answering your question, I guess, a little more sort of sanitized, which is, on that mobile device management piece, we are very hostile about how we look at that network, what is accessible, what apps can and cannot be used on the work phone. There are also then employee training on use of the personal devices. Now, that's one place where we probably have a very different experience than many of you in the audience, which is we do not have a bring your own device and plug it into a network option or procedure. So on any of our actual networks, on any of the fibers. So I think that puts us in a little bit different category, but you're not wrong from a mission perspective. Are we accessing, again, with a court order, information from social media and things? You know, again, the public, you all know that we are, and there are strict controls around that. There's required by law logging of some of that. So again, it's a little tricky for me to answer this question, only because we're regulated by legislation in a lot of these areas about how we have to handle data, you know, when, where, and how. And again, from an organization that doesn't really allow things like social media apps necessarily on our work phones or enterprise or those networks, it's a little bit different. Sorry, but maybe you guys want to, because this is probably a good conversation about how are you guys looking at your employees, right? And how to bring your own device and other things and protecting your employees overseas.
I can go. Thank you for asking a non-5G question. I can answer that a little bit. I mean, there's a couple of things. So obviously, in US public sector, you know, on the civilian side, there is BYOD. And with that, there are the risks of, hey, users now blending personal and work, they could have WhatsApp for personal use. There's really no visibility into that. You know, I think the DoD refers to COBO, corporate owned business only, or GFE, as you mentioned, government furnished equipment. I think in those cases, depending on the mission needs, you know, there are tools out there. There are vendors that offer the ability to run WhatsApp in a way that it can be audited and logged, or any messaging app for that matter. I think where things get really interesting, you know, from our lens, is a lot of times the way that works is like for example, the default messaging apps on the phones, SMS, right? SMS is a very, very old standard. You know, carriers will archive that, but at some point that actually is an interesting paradox, because you're reducing the security of something that a lot of users use by default in order to archive it on the back end. And I think this is one of those interesting things where there are ways to archive also on the device potentially as well, where then you could still maintain end-to-end encryption, but do local archiving. In terms of, you know, back to your original question, for people deployed overseas, I think the policy wouldn't change, generally speaking. I mean, at the end of the day, most of these environments are GFE devices. They're really restrictive on what apps they deploy on the device. So they probably don't even have a situation where that would come about, where they're using a personal messaging app, unless it was approved for use for that on the device. This thing that you brought up that is very interesting is what prevents a user from doing that on their personal phone. They don't need BYOD. You know, it's kind of like, I've always had this joke in my head about, you walk into a building, your government phone has the camera disabled. What prevents you from taking a picture on your personal phone? And that's where the policy and the education has to come in, going back to users are your pets. Sorry, I know it sounds bad, but it's an easy way to remember it. But the policy and education really has to come in, because you want to educate them to do the right things, but you need the policy to say, you know what, caught your hand in a cookie jar, you're losing your access, because, you know, it's a privilege, not a right sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't have anything to add from the networking side. So.
The one thing to keep in mind too is when I talk to a lot of CIOs and such, they don't even take their government device overseas. They have a burner phone, if you will. That's probably not the right term in government world, but
No.
yeah, but you know what I mean. They have a one-time use. They bring it across overseas. They use it there, and they bring it back, and the IT folks wipe it clean and deal with it.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, one of the probably biggest things you can do as an enterprise is make sure that if you are allowing those devices to go overseas, that the first thing you're doing is inspecting upon return, and you're focusing on that, and you're, you know, segmenting and fencing until you can, you know, ensure that it's clean.
We're just about out of time, so I'm gonna check online one more time. If anyone online who's watching virtually has a burning question, no yet. All right, it's your last chance. All right, in the meantime, unless if anyone in the room has a burning question, I have one left. All right, nobody has one. All right, so well, there's a lot of discussion on 5G. It's a debate we have internally in our office about how excited people are about 5G, and we keep going back and saying, okay, who's doing 5G? And the answer is like, well, there's a lot of pilots. So since there's a lot of excitement about it, and I know, Eugene, you really want to talk about 5G. But for Katie and Mike to start with, what are you most excited from an FBI or NIST perspective? What will 5G mean to you in a year from now, 5 years from now, however long it is until we actually are using 5G? And then Eugene, since your 5G excitement is lower.
I have 5G FOMO.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Maybe talk from a mobile security perspective. What are you excited that maybe either you're seeing trend wise across the government or public sector? And then how's Google playing into that? So two separate but similar questions. Katie, I think you started off, so I'll make Michael start off this time since you started off last time.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the additional security features that have been standardized, bringing enhanced mobility, massive devices connecting, be able to increase the security for not only devices connecting, but traversing across the network, as well as enhancing the core security of the network, as well as the modernization of the service-based architecture, making things more cloud native. So really you can start using commodity hardware to build out these 5G networks, and then introduce traditional cloud security capabilities on top of it than just vendor black boxes that comprise the network.
And real quick, the work you mentioned at the very beginning, that first piece of it's going to be ready in about a month or two for calling, and then I imagine you'll add more capabilities. So when will, it's never done, I get that, but when will folks around here be able to say, I'm going to go check this out at NIST?
Yeah, hopefully, like I said, in the next couple of months, when the phone call's up and running, we can demonstrate some of the 5G standard security features as well as the infrastructure security, and check out our NIST publication SP 1800-33.
We do every day.
Yeah.
Katie.
Yeah. So I'll give you two. So the first is edge, data analytics and data processing at the edge. We're very excited about that, being able to push a lot of the on-prem data analytics capabilities out to the edge, where we have folks in the field, where we're processing crime scenes, for instance. So we're really excited about that. The other one I would say is solving that latency issue to be able to do more virtual reality and mixed reality in particular. From a training perspective, mixed reality, we're excited about that, being able to do some virtual physical, cyber security, but also operational training. So we're pretty excited about that too. And again, those things only get solved with a latency issue, because that's really what's, I think, limiting many of us now from having that real-time connectivity to process things.
And I'll do a quick plug. Had a great conversation with the CIO at the Drug Enforcement Administration, obviously not the FBI, but Justice Department. That's coming up in a couple of weeks for our Cloud Exchange plug, shameless plug too. But the point is, there's a much different perspective, I think, when you talk to CIOs, not just at the FBI, but the DEA, ATF, about how cloud and data analytics. So I think that whole piece is really exciting for the Justice Department.
Yeah, so edge cloud.
Edge
Yeah.
cloud. There we go. All right, Eugene, you get the last word.
Thank you. As much as I was joking about 5G, I mean, we're heavily involved. We have folks that participate in 3GPP and GSMA, and we represent the endpoint. So when people have performance issues or security related things, they think of, oh, this phone is the one that's the problem, not necessarily the end infrastructure. And so from our side, there's a couple of things. Obviously, we're actively engaged in SDOs and consortiums to ensure that the endpoint is represented. We're providing proper resilience on the device side, continuing to harden things like the baseband, which has historically been overlooked. Also, which Mike, I'll follow up with you offline, but for example, Pixel devices do support 5G slicing today. And what's really neat about that, especially in the federal government context, is because we can do separation of work and personal data, we can actually allocate the 5G slicing only for the work side. So I think that'd be a really cool experiment to set up in the lab. So I'll leave it with that.
All right, that is exciting. All right, you all were a great audience. So let's give our panelists, who are great too, a round of applause. And I think they'll maybe stick around for a minute or two afterwards and try to answer your questions. So Tom, is it you? It's you, Tom Suter, everyone.
Yeah, we're going to just take about a 10-minute break. Definitely check we got some knowledgeable people back there from Google and Now Secure. Have a little more of extended break after the next panel, but we're going to be keeping with Tom Temin from the Daily Drive. We'll be up next moderating panel. Thank you all.
solve the sound problem because one of our panelists is remote. And every time he speaks through the speakers, we don't want it to sound like this. So that's, we figured out a manual way of doing this. Well, it's good to see everybody here this morning. I'll tell you, it was hearing Katie talk about the effect that you can get by plugging your phone into a charging station at the airport. I always figure, I hope China takes the data off my phone and off my browsing, because if we're going to win the new Cold War, I'll just say it, against China, my data and probably yours would bore them to death. So that's how we'll win. So they're welcome to it if they want to break into my phone. And it's good to be upstairs here with ATARC. Love these panels. The columns down the middle remind me of a little bit of Boston Garden, if you're old enough to remember that building, where as a kid, I watched the great late Bill Russell dribble. And if you got really cheap seats when you arrived there, you knew why. So if there's anyone behind the column, good morning. All right. So we're going to talk about 5G and to some degree, the differences between 5G and 4G, but more important, what you can do with 5G with respect to cloud applications and some of the technology and application end of that. And I know that if you have a phone like I do, the word 5G pops up from time to time on the top row there where the signal is. I can't tell any difference from 4G. And there's, in fact, when I went from 3G to 4G, I'm still waiting for fast downloads, but I think there's a lot more to 5G than you can get on your phone nowadays. And we're going to talk about all that. Our guest today, first of all, online, if you could see him on the big screen, is Dr. Tom Osborne. And he's actually a medical doctor. He's an MD working for the VA. He's also the director of the National Center for Collaborative Healthcare Innovation at VA. And I guess that sounds like telemedicine, sort of spread out into a lot of words. So we'll talk about some of the innovative things they really are doing there. We've got Brian Merrick, who's the director of cloud programs at the State Department, and Kevin McFadden, the chief 5G business solution architect for U.S. public sector at Cisco. So great to have you all with us today. And we're going to have each panelist, columnists like to talk like me. Each panelist just give a quick talking about what they view as the big challenges in 5G, the differences between 4G, what you can do that you couldn't do before, and maybe just a little bit of hint of the application and cloud connectivity that Okay, Dr. Osborne, can you hear us?
Yep,
Blink twice.
gotcha.
All
I
right,
lost
there we
audio
go.
for a minute, but I'm with you. Thanks.
All right, go ahead and start.
All right, I think I heard some of that. So great thoughts. So the difference between 4 and 5G was the first one. And, you know, the way I think about it, the 4G, what most of us use for mobile computing, you know, with our phones, it's going from there to 5G is like going from, you know, a 1-lane road or a dirt road to a super highway where you can move more stuff faster. And you don't always need to go to that super highway, but if you want to do sort of big stuff, if you want to move lots of things around efficiently, then that's really critical. Tell me, Tom, what were your other questions? I don't think I heard them all.
Well, yeah, just a sense, maybe an overview of some of the innovative things you're doing.
Some of the innovative things that we're doing. So, okay, so we're using 5G for a variety of use cases. And really, so big picture in healthcare, you know, we have done an amazing job in healthcare collecting a large volume of data. One of the things that we haven't done as well as we hope to is converting that data into information to knowledge and wisdom. In other words, translating that into use cases that benefit health and wellness. And so one of the things that we can do is utilize these big infrastructures to move more data around faster in order to allow us to do things that we are only doing now in a limited way, or in allowing us to do things that we could only dream of before. And so it opens up the aperture of possibilities. For example, some big data stuff includes, you know, imaging and genomics and electronic health records. And in just one of those spaces in imaging, you know, the ability to transform two-dimensional objects into three-dimensional holograms that you can manipulate and to use to teach and to train and to guide procedures, That is super important for us to be efficient in delivering healthcare. But it's also important if we talk about safety and value, because when we can do that well, then we can reduce the amount of time it takes for us to do certain procedures and to have everyone educated better. I could go on for probably a couple hours about that, but that's some high level stuff that we've been working on.
So it's not just, it's not simple. Right? He
I
agrees.
wish I could hear you, but I
right,
think
we'll-
the volume keeps going
We'll
out
come
on
back
me.
to that question. So if the Veterans Affairs Department, I'm coming out a couple of places here, operates nationally in probably 10 time zones, the State Department operates in every time zone in the world. So Brian Merrick, tell us more about some of the 5G enablement happening for cloud at State Department.
So as you can imagine, we're 275 overseas locations, 50 domestic locations across the country. We've got 47 different reporting organizations that all predominantly do different functions and tasks. So we have a multitude of use cases, and really what we've been working on lately is, we've built up our multi-cloud environment, the underpinnings for that. We've also massively increased investments in data analytics capabilities. And so we're really looking at 5G to sort of bring all those capabilities together and push that capability out from headquarters and into the edge. So much diplomacy is happening, far-flung parts of the world. We really need to be able to get that capability for business applications and complex data analytics democratized in terms of access to those capabilities, so that the actual users in the field can really leverage that to answer questions for senior management, to support decisions in a timely way, to share information across multiple stakeholders inside and outside the State Department. And in addition, we're sort of the mayor, if you will, for government agencies overseas. So we also have to have an eye towards those other ancillary areas for our other agency partners that really need that access and support. So rather than looking at 5G as sort of a distinct pilot, if you will, we kind of see it as an underlayment to help us get at scale and speed. Obviously, we need that securely. Some of the things we're also working on, as that infrastructure proliferates, is really starting to bring our cybersecurity and our enablers up to parity with our on-premise capabilities. And that's something that we've documented in our cloud strategy, and we're really trying to resource that now. So, in order to actually operate in these environments, we need to start moving into more no-code platforms, a lot more SaaS, a lot more cloud security posture management. All of those types of things have to work together, better encryption. And ultimately, with the overseas environment, and I know some of the risks we were talking about earlier, really, really getting a good handle on encryption and key management at scale is going to be something that we've got to really build up to be prepared to fully take advantage of a lot of these capabilities as they continue to evolve.
Okay, good. A million possible follow-up questions, but first I want to go to Kevin at Cisco. Cisco has been around since, X25 practically.
we
And
have.
so
I did some of
5G
that.
takes us, I think you mentioned earlier when we were discussing this panel, the idea that 5G takes the entire network beyond the wire. So maybe discuss some of the trends you see
Sure.
that could result there.
And I'll go back to some of your earlier questions just to kind of blend it in. A lot of times I think we're, as a society, looking at the fact that 5G is coming at us in our TVs and our radios every day. And there's a lot of question about, what is it delivering for us? In fact, you said yourself, the experience hasn't changed very much. Reality is, when you look deeper into your phone, you realize that you're still on an LTE network, believe it or not, for the most part. So I think we're still in a little bit of a slow momentum. We all were exposed to this about 2 years ago. And really, it was about the user experience as to what 5G was trying to offer. I think we've seen a lot of challenges from the commercial carriers trying to demonstrate a user experience change. And in fact, they tried to monetize a lot of that, and some of that failed, frankly. I think we're going to see a revisit of this. And part of that is going to be the commercial carriers retooling what they're doing with 5G, as well as this dichotomy that we'll see between private 5G and public 5G. What I mean by that is, there's a lot of discussion right now about how 5G could actually be part of your enterprise solution as opposed to being consumed by a commercial carrier. So there's a variety of choices that are coming about as a result of that. And those are all being driven by the user experience. You know, when I'm in a government agency or even in a commercial setting, what could I do with 5G that I couldn't do with Wi-Fi or with commercial carrier? Those are going to be questions that we'll want to address. And the promise there is that I could do things like unmetered services. So I'm not paying by the gigabyte or on a per byte basis. I'm being able to get spectrum at a level and a capacity that I couldn't necessarily get before. I'm also getting the ability to have deterministic communications, more industrialized communications. So when I have an environment like a robotics environment, or I think some other folks were very enthusiastic about AR, VR, these are the kinds of things that I'll have to be able to deliver and make choices whether I'm going to consume these via a public carrier or whether I'm going to implement them in a private setting. So we're experiencing that in a lot of cases at Cisco, questions coming from both sides of that equation. And it'll be interesting over the next several years to see how that's embraced, what that means, particularly in terms of security. The commercial carriers, I think there was a lot of activity. In fact, I'm involved with that NIST NCCOE activity. I'm familiar with that. It's interesting when you look at some of the activities that are happening in these reference architectures. I think it'll be interesting to understand how those architectures will influence some of the major service providers and how those will influence how you consume these on the private level as well, the public versus private model. So hopefully that gives us some threads to talk on.
Yes, and I want to get back to something that Brian mentioned. You said as the mayor for agencies overseas, that reminded me of a comment I heard the other day that in the area of customer experience, and I'm going to broaden the term customer experience to include employee experience or user experience, as well as actual constituents to federal agencies. And one of the drives, I think, coming from OMB, coming from the whole playbook aspect of customer experience, is the interagency requirement, the shared data for a given application so that you can give that fully rich experience to a user. So maybe discuss how you can see greater backhaul capacity, greater capacity to the edge with some of these 5G technologies as perhaps enabling shared services, data sharing. You mentioned analytical product sharing. On the interagency sides, that's something that you envision. And we'll also ask Dr. Osborne the same question.
Certainly, especially in the overseas space. As you can imagine, there's a large confluence of shared equities and a lot of international situations between different agencies. And so I really see these things coalescing around mission space versus raw capabilities, if you will. You can look at recent events in Afghanistan as an example, where we had a large interagency effort where we basically shared data and application capabilities. We had to be able to actually reach out to users rapidly in a very useful mobile fashion using cloud-based tools to be able to capture the data we needed for the operational support we were conducting, and then be able to share that data back out across a multitude of stakeholders and ensuring that they have the same view of that data. So I think that's kind of an example of where we're going to go. And by having this additional capability of 5G in more places, we'll be able to do a lot of that faster by having more of the analytics happen locally and then pushing up versus pulling that back in and then trying to do that centrally. And that'll allow the folks on the ground to really coalesce around that information and make better local decisions faster.
Okay, and if you can hear us, Dr. Osborne, that's a smile. You can hear a thumbs up. Also at Veterans Affairs, there's a lot of external reaction. Sometimes I think I know what it's like to be an announcer at Yankee Stadium in this room. Interaction between VA and private healthcare providers over a given patient or patient situation. And also, I think maybe you can comment on the vast amount of research that is not directly connected to a given patient, but VA funds and has the benefit of in so many different medical areas. So maybe talk about that sharing and interaction, cloud enablement, edge, and to partners and to people that you interact with, the shared service model there too.
Tom, those are some really awesome questions. So the VA, as many healthcare systems, are working in different ways to share data across different groups. And, interoperability is sort of one category of thought, how different technologies can work together, but also how different healthcare systems can share knowledge. So you have a fuller picture of what's going on in the patient if they have episodic points of care in different places. And understanding the full spectrum of healthcare delivery is important to giving someone the right treatment and the right diagnosis. So all that's really important. A lot of that is constrained by HIPAA and security postures, because sharing data does take a bit of bureaucracy no matter where you are at. And so that is really, I think, from my lens, the major rate limiting factor for any healthcare system to efficiently share data from one place to another. The abilities to utilize 5G and edge computing, what we've been talking about a little bit, I think really will allow us to do things once we get past some of those sort of policy hurdles in ways that could never been done before. And let me, give you, I think as a big picture, this topic to me is really about performance, is to bring the right tools and technologies to the right place so we can give the right diagnosis at the right time. And if you do all that really well, then people have healthier, happier lives, because the faster we come to a diagnosis, the faster we come to the right treatment, the better people are going to be. And there's no shortage of research that shows that. So when you talk about edge computing, for example, what we're really talking about is offloading a lot of the processing power that usually happens on-prem, even on, whether it's an on-premises server at a healthcare system or even on a device itself. There's only so much you can do. If you want to do really advanced things to provide the best possible care, then, and if you're working in that sort of old paradigm, then you got to carry around like a big, gaming computer on your back. I mean, that's just not practical. And so what the network allows us to do with edge computing is then the network becomes the computer. And so those devices can shrink in size. They can become more adaptable. They can produce more results and can do more with smaller space. And so instead of having, in the case of an augmented reality headset, instead of having a big bulky thing that doesn't allow you to communicate well with other people because it covers half of your face and it's relatively heavy, and if you're in a surgery for 4 hours, it's going to give you a headache. Instead of having that, you could, if you're working on the edge, if you can take that computer weight off of your head, then you can have something on the size of glasses, and all of that processing power just happens on the network at the edge on the cloud. And that really is going to open up the world of possibilities for everybody.
Then I want to go back to Kevin at Cisco, the question of the architecture of all of this, and maybe also comment on, I think, something that Brian mentioned, the idea of encryption over the network at speed, because that relates to the HIPAA question, the sharing of research, the sharing of possibly personally identifiable information and so forth.
Sure.
So what does network architecture and network management begin to look like then in the 5G world?
So a great question. And it's interesting if we do a quick analysis of what was 4G and what does 4G have different from 5G. I'll try and keep this as light as possible so that we can maybe have fun with this. But when you look at a 4G network, it was really the radio infrastructure at the edge. And at some point in a very centralized location, it might surprise you that a national carrier network might actually home back to 3 or 4, maybe 5 different locations, and that's it. So these locations were extremely important. They were significant aggregation points, and that's why the latency in some cases was a challenge. In other words, if you're on the West Coast and that central aggregation point is somewhere in the Midwest or mid portion of the United States, you're going to suffer a physics problem. And that's the real latency issue. And so to be able to drive that down, what 5G is doing is changing the architecture. And it's giving us the opportunity to, as fast as we get on the network, we need to be able to work towards an ambition of getting you off the network as quickly as possible and to your applications. And that also comes to this concept of cloud. If I can deliver the cloud as close to that off-ramp of the 5G network to the on-ramp of the cloud environment, I'm going to get the best user experience. So those are sort of the nirvana of this discussion. The other piece of this is, as 5G becomes more decentralized and disaggregated, We may still have those central aggregation, central intelligence points, maybe 3 to 5 central intelligence points for a national network, but the abilities to apply policy, apply security, add compute to the edge becomes more plausible. And that's the general thesis of 5G and how it's going to evolve perhaps better than 4G was, at least in terms of the infrastructure pieces. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits to that. I just talked a lot about the latency pieces. We're starting to drive the latency down to, the ideal place is 1 millisecond of round trip response between you and your application. That may sound like not a lot when we're already at maybe 40 or 20 milliseconds, but millisecond, the harder it is. So it's exciting. It's interesting for folks in my environment where it's technology, but it's also about security as well, because now what we've got is this, as many of our colleagues, throughout the conversation have talked about commercial off the shelf. We've got a lot of open architectures, maybe some open source. That becomes a bigger path to be able to secure. In fact, some of these documents that we talked about earlier with the CISA talk about some of the vulnerabilities associated with this disaggregated and decentralized approach. So it becomes incumbent upon all of us, all the way to the application providers, to look at that path. It's also very challenging because in some cases we may not be able to prescribe or own that path, especially if we go to a commercial provider. I'm sure Brian could probably, tell us his concerns about once he puts these users on that commercial path, he can't tell the commercial provider what to do along that path. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, I think so. Before we go to Brian, to answer your question, though, I just wanted to follow up.
Sure.
Before the internet in the late 80s and early 90s, or even before that, in corporate America, people that wanted to connect one place to another would lay dedicated lines, very expensive, or they would have what were then called value-added networks, if you recall that era. In some ways, it seems like 5G takes us back out of the internet model with hopping all over the world and purloining at every stop point to almost like the VPN or direct line model, only without the line.
Potentially. And in fact, there's also a concept that I didn't get a chance to mention in the last piece, was this idea of data sovereignty. There's actually an extreme case of this, particularly when we start looking at putting the infrastructure directly on the government premise or maybe a military base or in a customer's environment. Now I can get on the network and get off the network within the customer environment. That becomes very interesting because now I don't have to send my data out to some third party and worry about the vulnerabilities associated with that. So perhaps you're correct in terms of the value-added networks. This really is a concept where you could potentially have the off-ramp of the 5G network within your environment and thereby own your destiny in a bit better fashion than otherwise.
Okay, well, what do you say? State?
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, definitely. I just echoing all those thoughts. Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of concerns around data sovereignty, data management, and as well as Dr. Osborne's comments. I mean, we have similar, maybe even more complex requirements around privacy laws and legal access to different data types based on legislation. And we can have the same data element that will transition multiple different environments and sets of users, and therefore different laws. And so trying to manage that is definitely something that's always a challenge. I think in terms of the overseas environment, especially, it's going to be very difficult to not be on commercial infrastructure for us because we're in so many locations. Obviously, there are certain parts of the world that we would most likely handle differently from a security perspective. But I think once again, if we're being smart about how we architect our solutions in conjunction with the capabilities that 5G brings, really we should be focusing on the sort of defense and depth model for our data and making sure that we've got a good handle on the keys to our data, regardless of location, and that the data is encrypted properly based on the level of security risks that we have to that data. And that we're thoughtful about where we're routing that traffic as much as we can control that. And certainly the cloud access security piece on the application layer itself and the identity layer is critical to make sure that we've really done as much as we can to mitigate a lot of those risks. But I think the benefit that 5G brings will outweigh a lot of those concerns if we can put those mitigations in place.
Yeah, it almost, the speed and the capacity kind of obviates some of the issues that you might have felt with traditional or current networking setups.
Definitely. And in addition to that, I mean, I think it's important to remember too, that our users aren't just sitting in one location. Yeah, the embassy may be there, their desk may be there, but they'll be all around their host country, dealing with local officials and NGOs and whatnot. And so they often rely on highly mobile infrastructure that transits the local environment to be able to get back out.
And I read not long ago, there's still such a thing as the diplomatic pouch, isn't there?
Yes.
So could 5G and this online encryption and all of the speed maybe finally turn the wax itself, the wax seal, into a digital non-fungible asset, or whatever they call them?
Well, I think except for the things that have physicality, that would be a little challenging, but yes.
Okay, and before we go to the audience question, I want to ask a process and application question of Dr. Osborne. And that is, I was speaking recently to Claire Martirana, the federal CIO, and she said that digital services and cloud enablement can help every single thing in the government except persistence of paper. And the medical world is still rife with paper. So maybe comment and capability here, enabling new applications. Can we finally see that appreciable reduction in medical paper?
That's a fantastic question. So, paper is a reality for many people. And, obviously there's risks associated with anything that's a physical object that was just mentioned. But the VA has done a tremendous job with electronic health record. And the VA has been a leader for decades, since the 1960s. We have developed our own EHR from scratch. And so we were doing this before anyone else was thinking about it, and before I was around. So the VA has been on this path. Now, then there was a bunch of laws that were passed for everybody else in the country, like meaningful use, which it said basically, everyone's got to get on board with this EHR thing, and all these electronic health record companies came up. They really sort of, variety of different approaches to that, but eventually everybody, or just about everybody, got on board. I think that there's still times when people use paper, no matter where you are. I'm a computer kind of guy, a little bit of a nerd in tech, but I still have, a Post-it note here and there that I just jot something down quickly. So I don't know if technology is ever going to erase that, because there's something about just having something tangible. But for the VA, broad strokes, that is not a major issue. The other thing that I just want to touch on a little bit, you talked about, 4G or 5G, and, does everybody, is 5G going to be the only way to do things in the future? I just want to sort of add my little bias here. I think 5G is awesome if you need it, but the infrastructure that's required to make that happen is not insignificant. And quite oftentimes, it's not required for a lot of the things we do. If you want to do high-end work, if you want to move a lot of data around quickly and efficiently, and that use case requires that, yeah, it's going to be a paradigm shift that's going to expand options and opportunities. But sometimes, 4G works just fine. And on that note, what we really need to address, and I sort of urge a lot of the telco companies out there, is just basic services for a lot of people living in rural communities is going to be tremendous. There continues to be a digital divide for those living in rural communities and other areas. And 60% of our veteran population lives in rural communities. If they can't have basic connectivity, for telehealth, for example, then we are going to be a long way from democratizing care. And 5G is going to be a whole nother spectrum of possibilities. You also need it end to end. You can't just have 5G on one side of the equation, because it's only go as fast as the slowest point in that workflow. So I think what we really need to do is get basic services for everybody in parallel to doing this advanced work for pushing the boundaries and showing the art of the possible.
Okay, I guess I'm the microphone carrier here. I'll follow Jason Miller down to the floor, and if we have questions, 1, 2, 3. There we go. 1, 2, 3, it's working. I usually have producers that do this for me. So, Jim?
This is Jim Payne from Secure-G. Vince Cerf, one of the true fathers of the internet, had said later in his career, if we'd known that the internet was going to do what it's done, we would have definitely put more security baked into the internet. So here we are with 5G. What most consumers know about 5G, they're hearing at night on TV. It's the most secure infrastructure ever designed, much more secure than 4G, which is probably a true statement.
Not
And yet,
necessarily.
well, and yet we hear from the ESF group that there's 5G may not be ready for prime time as we have a tsunami of IoT devices heading in a direction. My question is, how do you prepare your consumers, your audience for the 5G, but also making them aware that the security issues have not really been worked out? We have to work as collaboratively with the private sector.
Want to take that one or you want me to? Oh. So I shook my head when you said 5G is the most secure. Let's put this in context. There's been a lot of vulnerabilities that have been identified in the 4G world. And those vulnerabilities, I think, have been well addressed as we moved into 5G. But 5G as an architecture, I described it a little earlier, as it becomes decentralized and disaggregated, becomes available on commercial off-the-shelf products. That opens it up to a whole lot of different things. Open source, I think that I don't want to paint myself as an open source good guy or bad guy, but there are pros and cons. And so let's just leave it as 5G opens up a whole new realm of opportunities for both secure as well as insecurities. Does that make sense? Hopefully. And then help me out with what else he asked. Well, how are you preparing? Yeah. How are we preparing? I have to be careful because I support a variety of our DoD customers, and we're spending a lot of time talking about zero trust. And so this is an underpinning. How do I ensure that not only, zero trust in many cases looks at the user and the application and says, as long as I can ensure that there's no implicit allocation of privilege, and that I can ensure confidentiality and integrity, that life is good. I've sort of summarized zero trust, but I think underpinning that is if the network isn't secure, if it doesn't have a secure supply chain all the way up from, its roots, digital, understanding of the hardware, the software, all the way up to the point where, we start talking about Brian's mission, where he's got to not only worry about the start of the communication, but the continuous discussion of the communication. That becomes a very difficult challenge. And underpinning that, at least from my perspective, is the network. The network itself, if it's not reliable, or I can't ensure that somebody's not exfiltrating that data, a big challenge. So I painted a lot of things there. It's a big opportunity. Maybe said negatively, it's a lot of risk. I think that we're still going to go forward and make a lot of use out of the 5G technology. I think we're going to do a lot of good things in terms of risk mitigation framework and understanding, what the pros and cons are in terms of, I need this connectivity, I need the kinds of throughput, the kind of latency that this offers. How can I mitigate the risks and still conduct business? Is that fair?
And Tom Osborne, any further comment? You mentioned HIPAA earlier and the need to protect personal data in all these contexts.
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously HIPAA is a big deal. It's really about security and privacy together. So that's always at the forefront of our minds. And we have a very lengthy and robust process of evaluating any system that we utilize at VA. I think it's pretty thorough. But the other question that you asked, I think, is really important, is like, how do you communicate this to the people that you're in charge of or that you serve? And, I think, in general, I always go on the side of transparency, and, you just communicate as much as you can and be as open as you can about what this is about. And then everyone has the option to participate in ways that makes the most sense for them.
Ryan, anything further on?
Yeah,
on the
just
security
briefly.
question?
I mean, I think it's similar to the dynamic we saw when cloud became a thing.
where everyone assumed, hey, it's more secure. And sure, as long as you configure it properly. So your security is only as strong as your weakest link. So if you don't have, the identity of your users established, if you don't have good perimeter controls around access to your data, if you don't understand how your applications are talking and your API structure is managed, anywhere in that sort of delivery chain, if you will, of capability, there's a potential risk. 5G doesn't necessarily impact that one way or the other than it's going to move faster. So I think it makes it even more important for everyone involved in that delivery chain to understand how their piece contributes to the ultimate movement of that data and the security around it. And IT professionals really need to pay attention and understand the different dynamics and nuances that these capabilities bring.
So instead of gone in 60 seconds, it'll be gone in 6 seconds, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. The answers will have to be lightning round. Sir?
John Hedderly from Mantech. This question's for Brian. You mentioned in your opening comments about the democratization of data access for field staff. And state's got an incredibly challenging mission when you think about, tens of thousands of employees spread among 275 locations globally. I wonder if you could share your thoughts on what state's progress has been in terms of migrating to a hybrid cloud environment as part of your IT modernization effort. And then maybe talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you're facing in doing that and some of the strategies for overcoming those challenges.
Yeah, sure. I could probably spend a whole hour on that, but just to be brief.
Just give us 2 minutes though.
Yeah, we'll be a little quicker than that. Yeah, we've established multi-cloud, public cloud environments, multiple ones, IaaS, SaaS, PaaS capabilities. And really we've kind of tailored those to specific mission capabilities and created a shared responsibility model so that basically we're allowing the business customers, if you will, that are doing the application development in their space, the ability to leverage shared and common control. So that's increasing security, reducing cost, all that good stuff, get them to work faster. And so by doing that over the last 2-3 years, we've got about 200 applications in different cloud environments. More coming every day. My own shop has done probably 40 enterprise applications. And we've really spread the use of Agile, also partnered strongly with our data analytics colleagues. So, the capabilities that people are seeing this and growing. So, but to Dr. Osborne's earlier point, it does come down to cost and do you need it or not. So in terms of hybrid solutions, yeah, we have some wickedly complex hybrid solutions out there for managing data movement in austere environments. Highly successful, and we moved entire capabilities into those hybrid environments. But hybrid's only one of the solutions. We use the best tool for the job. So it really depends on what we're trying to get at. Obviously, that increases complexity, cost, and risk. So we focus as much as we can on getting folks up the stack into SaaS environments, assuming that the licensing is affordable. It depends on what we're trying to do. So it really comes down to the intersection of risk and use case and cost.
All right, well, we are out of time. I think the implication we've seen basically from this discussion is that 5G really affects the entire chain of IT management and deployment from the user interface at the ultimate outside all the way deep into your own data center. So lots to think about, lots to follow up. Our panelists will remain here for more questions. In the meantime, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Dr. Osborne, thanks for tuning in from Palo Alto. And back to Tom Suter.
Thank you, Tom. Another great panel. Before we break, I just had a couple of things that have come up. You guys are.
He said, stay here. So
You can if you want. Yeah, we had some bad news in the last couple of weeks, as many of you know. A friend of ours, Don Logan, recently passed. He had been in the mobile side for as long as I've known him, which is probably about 15 years. He's a veteran, a family man. And the thing I liked about Don, and I just saw him a couple of weeks ago at our Zero Trust Summit, always has a smile on his face. I like people like that, positive people. He worked for Johnny over there for a few years, and a lot of us know him. So I just want to take a moment of silence, just a brief moment of silence to remember Don. Okay. One other brief announcement before we go to our break. We've kind of alluded to this discussion that we've had as far as the mobile FSMA metrics. I think Jason Miller had a trivia question in the beginning. in all seriousness, we don't understand. We worked on these mobile metrics as a group with the FMG for years. And we really, just a little background, we wanted to make them tougher, but you compromise. And so we got the 14 mobility metrics, and they were taken out without much notice. We won't go into that. So we wrote a letter to Chris Inglis, who's the National Cyber Director, and we're trying to get them put back in. Yes, there probably should be some more in the advent of zero trust, harmonizing with this administration. I will say this administration has been fantastic. We've come out with the cyber EO. We're like security, security, security. And then we drop mobile security. And we just heard from Jason, 54% of everybody's on, doing their internet traffic. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. We're going to send it out. There's a parallel effort that we're not going to get into that the federal government's doing with the Federal Mobility Group that is working with the CIO Council and others. So we think it's important. We love to deal with the administration. So, but sometimes you've got to disagree with the administration. So that's why we decided to do that. Anyway, if you need more information, we're going to distribute the letter at the in the conclusion of this. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. I will say we had a great group of industry folks. It's Now Secure was involved, Imperium, pretty much everybody in the federal ecosystem that's dealing with mobility, and we all came together. We all have been working this issue. It's a great example of the industry coming together. So I'm real proud of the letter. It's really not me. It's really the ATARC as a whole. So good stuff. We'll be taking a short break. This is your last opportunity, unless they hang out a little bit later, but talking to Now Secure. I heard they have some kind of app they want to demonstrate that opens up your house or something. What's that? It's a really cool app. You should not download it. That's the whole point. Don't do that. And then Google's kind of like really coming on strong here in the federal market. Jesse just re-entered the mobile market. He's been around for a long time. Is Jesse back there? Yeah, you're not Jesse. Okay, we'll get him, but we'll take a short break. When you hear the bell, that means we'll go in for our last panel. We have Amy Kluber. She's probably getting prepped right now. She's the editor-in-chief of GovCIO. Should be a last great panel, and then we'll get things going. Thank you all.
All right, everyone. So I think we're gonna go ahead and get started back so you can make your way back to your seats. And I just definitely want to give a shout out to everyone tuning to us in virtual land. Thank you for sticking with us. And we're gonna go to our third panel. I'd like to invite to stage our third panel and Miss Amy Kluber, and she's gonna be moderating today. She is the editor-in-chief over at GovCIO. All right, so I want to turn it over to Amy.
All right, good morning, everybody. Saved the best for last, hopefully. All right, I feel kind of short here, but hopefully you can see me fine. All right. Well, good morning. My name is Amy. Like he mentioned, I am the editor of Government CIO or GovCIO Media and Research, previously Government CIO. We cover a lot of this industry, so I'm really excited to get to talk to these guys who I had a chance to talk with earlier outside, as also yesterday. And I think there's a lot going on with the supply chain effort, of course. And when we talk about 5G and what that means for the technology landscape, the supply chain, often gets forgotten, and here, it shouldn't. So I'm joined by Demetrius Davis with the DoD 5G cross-functional team at MITRE. Thank you, Demetrius. I also have Nake Nweki, Director of Cybersecurity Supply Chain Risk Management at GSA's Federal Acquisition Service. Thank you, Nake. And also Brian Pape. He's in charge of Enterprise Standards and Engineering at CISA, not CISA. So I'm just going to go down the line. Won't pick randomly. I'll go down the line. Give us just a brief introduction of your organizations, what you're doing around supply chain, maybe how 5G fits in the picture, et cetera. And we'll start with Demetrius.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Demetrius Davis, as Amy sort of shared. I wear a few different hats. So yeah, I'm representing MITRE as a principal systems engineer. But I typically, you see me in a lot of different circles. So either between the DoD, the DHS, the IC. So I typically ping pong around solving different types of problems, different sponsor challenges, mostly around the area of 5G supply chain, 5G security, 5G acquisition, 5G policy strategy, and so forth. And so one of the areas I'm focusing on now is supporting OUSD ANS as part of the DoD 5G cross-functional team. I'm also doing some support for the Intel community. We're doing some work in the O-RAN Alliance and a lot of other standards bodies, for example. And one of the key areas I think where we really have done some great work is working with ATARC, which is a 3GPP partner for North America. We just recently put out this past January, December, we put out a new standard for 5G supply chain security. So yes, it's a lot going on in the 5G supply chain space. It's a little bit different from the ICT SCRM community, a little different from the C-SCRM community, because 5G brings a lot of political aspects to the table beyond the technical. And so hopefully we'll get into some of those things today.
Thanks. And Nake?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nake Nweki. I'm the Director of Cyber Supply Chain Risk Management at the GSA. And my function, I've been at the GSA now for a little over a year. My function is really to integrate supply chain risk management into our acquisition process. As you all may know, we have a marketplace, and part of what we do is to provide a secure marketplace. So the product and services we offer, we want to ensure their security as added value for our customer agencies. And so when they acquire goods and services from us, they have the trust and confidence in what they're acquiring. And so cyber, supply chain has been a big deal in the last several years. And as far as 5G, one of the things we do is obviously using like illumination tools to assess some of the products and services for security. We look at, for example, counterfeits. It's a big deal, obviously, making sure we eliminate some of those products that we might find not suitable.
Great. And I know we'll get into a whole lot of all of that in a little bit, but Brian, you next.
Okay. Brian Pape, I work for CISA, mainly in the standards area, looking at cyber supply chain risk management. I was handed this about 2.5 years ago. So leadership really didn't know what to do with it. They knew it was a problem. So this is This is pre-SolarWinds days. This is pre-GAO 21171. So leadership came to me and they said, just do this thing with it. We don't really know what that is. And those were kind of rock moments, right? Bring me a rock and I'll tell you if it's the right color. But we did a lot of due diligence and research in figuring out what that rock really needs to look like. So leadership today now has a good idea of what that needs to look like. So we've gathered a community of experts around the federal government to help us figure out what CSCRM needs to look like, figure out what acquisitions in CSCRM needs to look like and how they fit. Because oftentimes acquisitions is the redheaded stepchild out there. They don't get the love necessary. Blamed for a lot of the things that go wrong because requirements are not adequately determined or provided to acquisition specialists so they can write the appropriate FAR language into the contract. And then you have risk management, legal, you have cybersecurity. So there's a lot of connections in this that need to be established across an organization that really doesn't seem to be there today. But also to mention the hyper-federatedness of many of these organizations, right? So if you have Treasury out there, the 800-pound gorilla is the IRS. Now, are they talking? What does that communication needs to look like? What are the roles and responsibilities? So we're working on a lot of that with a couple of the pilot efforts to illuminate software, to illuminate suppliers, especially when it comes to 5G. So that's kind of where we are, Amy.
All right, thank you. Well, I do hear that after talking to these guys that the supply chain and when it comes to innovating around 5G, working together really is important. And I do want to go into that thread a little bit more. Let's start with Nage first. Talk through how 5G is impacting the supply chain and how it really does require that collective effort to approach it from different angles, from acquisition, from standards that we'll get into, and et cetera. How you work together to accomplish the vulnerabilities or overcome the vulnerabilities in the supply chain.
My organization actually we work very closely with Brian CISA. So we have, as I mentioned before, marketplace, and we use illumination tools, several illumination tools to gain insight into the products and services that are being offered on our marketplace. And we do assessments and try to eliminate products that might, say, for example, 889, for example, right? There are, this is too close. It needs to be closer, okay.
Next to your nose.
As close as possible.
So there are prohibitions with that, right? Acquisition of certain products and services made by certain companies, certain countries, right, that are prohibited. We use elimination tools to gain insight. There are counterfeit issues, right? And there are also, affiliates and subsidiaries that we want to get insight to understand exactly where they're coming from. And, there are also issues, of course, foreign ownership and influence. So these are some of the insights that those AI-enabled illumination tools will provide. Now, if there's an incident happen to occur, right? Because you can't detect everything. Incidents do occur. And we work closely with CISA to support our client agencies who might have acquired products and services to be able to respond to the incident in helping fix some of the problems using some of the guidance that CISA might have put out.
Can I give an
So
example of that?
Of course.
Okay, so reading an article this morning about HHS. So it looks like in the article CMS, and I don't know if somebody here wrote that or not. There are limitations to what they're able to do because they don't have the adequate tool suite or tool sets to remediate some of those issues or findings that their OIG has identified. So an example of that would be they would reach out to this man right here who would get them on the right path moving forward. Is that a good example?
That's perfect. I'm sure you have a lot of those. Yeah, so we were talking outside that we have to, she was asking whether we work together. Like, we have to work together. And we do, work really well together in our efforts to support the federal government agencies in meeting the security needs.
All right. There are times when working together can cause challenges. Let's talk through some of those. Maybe too many cooks in the kitchen, or there's not enough standards that are, outlined first. And I think, Brian, you're kind of itching to answer this one.
Yeah. Oftentimes, the federal government likes to bring things to market before it's truly evaluated in terms of need or meeting the capabilities. And that's what I try to do, is stop that. Because as the federal government, we want to lay out the capabilities and standards that a product needs to meet in order to be added to a marketplace, right? Those could be like the minimum requirements of a vendor or supplier illumination tool or software V&V, something like that. But I think that's sometimes as tools get moved into the marketplace, that analysis is not completely or conducted to completeness as the way it should. So that's what we're starting to do with vendor or supplier illumination capabilities. We're taking a look at what NIST has out there, what best practices are out there, pulling everything in, and we have a group of about 25 agencies. Jason talked to me about this last week. So we're coming together, and it's a learning effort. It's not a pilot. Okay. We want to determine when enough is enough. Okay. You have 651 capabilities, but that's crazy to think that we can have a vendor capability that will be able to meet all of those. So what makes sense? What is a nice to have? Push that off. And what does the future need to look like, right? So build to scale and build for 5 to 7 years from now. So that's the approach I'd like to take moving into a marketplace, leaving that extra room for growth. But it's currently kind of a headache right now, but
sounds like it.
Yeah, we're trying to tackle it.
Demetrius, what about from the defense point of view? You're working hand in hand with getting this technology out into the warfighters, which is you encounter a whole different slew of challenges there and kind of bureaucracy. So talk through some of that.
Yeah, I was listening to Brian speak, and I was like, man, I actually disagree with everything he's saying. I mean, not from a principal point of view, it's the right thing. It's just that I'm on the end of the spectrum where, especially when we're talking about the 5G community and we're trying to bring that into certain circles within the defense community, we're trying to speed things up as quickly as possible. It's like, hey, you can talk TRL levels all you want, but at the end of the day, someone needs a capability, and we don't want our processes or acquisition, and our budgeting systems to be able to get in the way of a warfighter getting a solution that can help win a fight. So we have this creative tension going on in terms of, we want things to be secure, but we don't want to get to the point where we're 2 generations behind technology-wise.
It's a different mission.
Right. So so I think the tension is great. We need to have that, so we don't go cavalier and just throw anything out there and be reckless. But we do need to find rapid ways of fielding, rapid ways of doing assessments from security and cybersecurity and a supply chain perspective. You're not going to have 100% visibility into your security. You're not going to have 100% transparency in your supply chain. The reality is most of the 5G infrastructures are going to a more virtualized, disaggregated, and disaggregated just basically means we're going to have multi-vendors in our ecosystem. It used to be one point you give a prime a contract, and they're going to build and be responsible for everything end to end. Now we want to be able to give out little piece parts to everyone and have a contract for each piece part. We're going to integrate all those, do all the interoperability testing, regression testing, all the security testing. And after the first day this thing gets deployed, someone's going to do software patches. And that system is no longer the system that you remember assessing on day one. So we got to figure out, how do we handle this type of environment? DevSecOps, the way we do it today, is not keeping up with what the type of ecosystems we want to build. And so in reality, I agree what you're saying. We need to have, a plan laid out. We need to have certain standards that we put down, but we have to also figure out where does that, there's got to be a point where we identify what's critical and say, okay, I really need to have high intel. I need to have, rigor placed in this area, but in this area, I'm going to have to accept some discomfort. I'm going to have to work with a vendor that I may not know and have a long history with. And that person may have relationships with people I don't really have a close relationship with. And we're going to have to sort of take baby steps and small iterative cycles to be able to get there. But we can't, be stagnant and wait till everything is in place. Everything has been blessed and on the approved products list before we take a first step. So that's a new type of culture that we're going to have to create. And I'm not sure how we're going to get there. Some people are going to be uncomfortable. And we're used to, seeing people kind of, slide around their chairs while we're talking. But that's the type of ecosystem that we're trying to build in. And it's going to take a little while because DoD has a history of sort of being a little slow. So some of this is going to be a little disruptive.
So it's a little bit different of a perspective because you're talking more about adding items to the APL as quickly as possible to meet the need. Mine is more slowing this down so we can identify what a supplier illumination capability needs to look like. Then we can measure what's out there and add it to an APL. It's a little bit different, but yeah, different missions have, you're supporting the warfighter, so yeah.
It's interesting listening to this tension. I feel it.
You're in the middle.
No, I've felt this tension before. I think the key here is that there's a lot that's happened in the last several years in terms of policy and regulations, executive orders, memos, almost like, it feels like almost on a daily basis. And I feel Brian's pain. So I know what that feels like. And I've been in situations where I'm talking to other folks that support the government that keeps telling me things like, oh, I just need this or operation. We're struggling in government. We're trying to help agencies. It's been, folks are behind. It's not about doing more. And I think sometimes folks maybe they give us a lot of credit in the federal government agencies without, that we are not there yet. Because there's been so much coming out federal government agencies at once. And from my point of view and Brian's, we're trying to help government agencies meet their security needs. And it's a challenge, but we appreciate the tension because it makes us work harder.
Right.
And, it's important.
And to make matters worse, is that as we move more into a software-based ecosystem, all these tech stacks are becoming, homogenized with commodity systems where we're basically putting software on top of them. And that's going to be much more difficult because a hardware supply chain, a little easier when you got RFID stickers on everything, right? You can just kind of zap and it doesn't go anywhere unless someone moves it. And so it's a little easy to track. But now as we move everything to software, I think this is really going to be a challenge because now it's invisible to most of us. It's one of those things where, hey, a package gets sent to you, it gets uploaded. Someone writes some stuff, types some code into a command line, and boom, you got yourself a network. and so the cloud world is, as much as that has changed that landscape, we're finding that telecom is also terraforming as well. It's like, and these are people that grew up with Ma Bell in their background. And now you're telling them, hey, we're going to do microservices and putting all these functions out in containers and distributing them all over, in these edge nodes. And they're like, okay, what do I do with this switch? And it's a different world for everyone. So everyone's really uncomfortable. So while all this sea change is happening, we're talking about, as cloud and AI and all these technologies start to converge, now we got people like, I only know this one thing, and now I have to learn this other thing. And this stuff is moving, as you said, things are moving really quickly. I'm reading, I'm thinking, hey, I'm on top of it. Then I walk into another meeting and realize, oh gosh, I gotta go and spend some hours taking a class on something because there's a whole new wing. The blockchain was the latest thing. And so you blink in 6 months later and everyone's off to a whole new area of study. So it forces those of us on the front lines to stay on top of what's the latest coming out of industry, marry that with what are the gaps between what industry is providing and what government really needs, and really talk to the government side and say, hey, we need to separate needs from wants. There's some stuff that we just feel comfortable with, but they're not really needs. They're more like comfort food. These things that we enjoy. And we have to sort of scale some of that back because there's going to be discomfort on the industry side as well. We're asking them to share who your suppliers are. And they're like, no, that's compromising my business position. I think there was a recent article, the Army had just recently lost a case saying that they wanted to consider the supplier list as part of their technical data that they're requesting. And they lost that. It's like reality is say, hey, you don't need to know who my suppliers are. We have a certain amount of information that's required by contract to give you, and we're providing that. We don't have to give this information that impacts our business, our IP and our business position. And so we're forcing them to be uncomfortable too. So in order for us to find this spot in the middle, we're going to have to, both sides are going to have to do some compromising, and neither side is going to be really happy with the outcome.
So I want to pull on another thread we kind of mentioned a little bit, policies, governance. What more needs to be done here to kind of get us in a better position where everyone feels comfortable? Brian?
Everything. So when it comes to developing supply chain or cyber supply chain risk management PMO or governance around that, there are elements of the federal government that are actually doing it, but they're not doing that much. So take a look at P cards, right? To me, that's a supply chain policy. Many of those don't exist or don't exist as thorough policies of what P card holders need to do and how they need to be trained. Governance structure around a program and how that flows from the higher element down to the federated organizations. It's not there. We're not seeing strategies. We're seeing program plans, right? So we took an effort to develop a pilot. This was a pilot, okay? And it was taking 6 CFO Act agencies through a learning effort to figure out what C-SCRM needs to look like from a headquarters perspective and a operational perspective. We've developed that guide. We're rewriting it. It seems like every week because we're getting a lot of new information. But we provide templates, artifacts, strategic plans, roadmaps, resource guides, funding charts, just to help them get started on something, right? So if they get that governance piece down and they have their strategic plan, and then they start acting on those milestones within their organization and take a look at the AOPs and map them down to your strategy, then they can start figuring out what type of capability they need within their mission space that is best for them to use. Not just because somebody came by and it looked really cool. Now I need 5 analysts. So it's a struggle right now. I'm sure it is in DOD talking to Michelle Iverson.
Actually,
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's in terms of policy, and I know some policymakers in here, we've been writing policies for years. And the problem that we've always had is we were forced to write one size fit all policies. And it's impossible to do that nowadays. It's hard to say how will this system be used in any possible way? And I'm gonna write a policy that applies to all those situations. So, I mean, and we don't really like writing policy to say, hey, for this use case, in this type of environment, under this type of security, posture, you do X, Y, and Z. I mean, we have some of that in the RMF, if you want to look at different types of impact levels and things like that. But typically when we write our policy, it's thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. And it's really hard to do it because you don't know every situation in which you're going to be dealing with. So it'd be great if we can write micro policies. I don't know if that's a thing. Can we coin it? But if a micro policy can say for this type of system, we can bucket systems however we like. But for this bucket of systems, this is going to be considered good enough, security. This is going to be good enough supply chain. If you're going to be dealing with, this bucket over here, this may have a lot of adversarial, entities inside of that marketplace, and we may take some extra precautions. And we won't be able to avoid all of the bad folks, but we might want to contain the bad folks to this part of the ecosystem. Hey, these are critical components like the microelectronics. I got some AI embedded chipset here that's going to be controlling everything. I need to make sure the people that are building that are people I know and trust. The people that are just like providing me cables and accessories that are sort of like they're somewhat trivial. I may say, hey, I really don't care. You can buy it from Best Buy. We care less where we get it from. But right now, we don't have that type of fidelity in our policy writing or in our STIGs and SRGs and all the NIAP guidance out there. So I don't know if we can, have a overarching document that says this is some general stuff that everyone needs to be practicing, some basic hygiene everyone needs to follow. But then after that, refer to, volume 3, volume 12, volume 75, however many volumes we need, so that we can speak to more specific situations and have something that can stay up to speed with that particular marketplace, because not everyone's in the same marketplace. The folks we deal with, they turn over stuff. We're trying to go to Open RAN technologies, which is a totally brand, that's a niche within the telecom community. And so not all your telecom players that you know and trust in your defense industrial base are inside of this Open RAN, marketplace. So they have to forge, and a lot of these are just software vendors. Go to Silicon Valley. Hey, I just started my company 3 years ago with me and a few friends. We defected from another company. We started something, and now we're the leaders in this particular, area. And so what do you do with that type of thing? Is it bad because they're a young company and they don't have past performance? Or is it a good thing because we know everyone by name inside of this company? So we don't have any policies that actually, deal with that type of scenario. So if we can have some flexibility to say, hey, give me some overarching guidance, but at some point I got to have we do this to say, hey, I want to have some local authority to make some decisions that may make sense in this marketplace or for this particular use case scenario. I don't know if that's possible, but that would be really helpful.
I'm going to take that. It's coined micro policy.
So I just want to add that I enjoy listening to you guys, that at least you're not talking about introducing policies that create more mandates or technology, but I think listening to you is more of policies that help enhance what we're doing right now, that helps us to implement and enforce some of the things and do it well. So that's my point of view as well. There's just so much that the policies we need, right? From C-SCRIM implementation requirement to the Federal Acquisition Security Council that coordinates sharing of information, all the components in the EO 14028, the SBOM. So there is so much going on that policies that can help enhance the implementation and enforcement of these would be what would be really great.
Kind of on another side of the coin there, how do you get this written into the contracts to begin with? How do you, from an acquisition perspective, what goes into that? Brian or Demetrius?
Yeah, sure. We tried, and I've sort of referred to the ATARC effort a little while ago. The whole point was if we can get a public-private forum established where we can sit down and come up with a standard or a standard that sort of speaks to how would you like to report your supply chain information, and try to get government and industry, which means it's going to be a little pushing and back and forth until we get there. But if we can codify some things as standards or some type of specification we can point to, then it should make it easier, because now that becomes a bit of a living document. If we need to revise one specification, then all of our contracts should be at a point and say, hey, if you follow this ATARC, standard, then that, and stay in compliance with that, then we don't have to write a whole bunch of line items in our contract saying what you have to do and realizing that the landscape is going to shift. And I'm talking mostly in a certain type of IT type of environment. So some places it probably doesn't make sense to do this, but in a world where, someone may swap out one supplier for another or one component for another, some people may not think that's a big deal, but depending on who you talk to, it could be a huge deal. And those types of details, we don't want to have to keep going back and doing contract mods. So it'd be easier to say, look, and really the standards we're writing isn't really like we write our policies, it's more outcome driven. It's like, this is what we want, this is where we want to end up. After you do all of your security testing and your authentication and everything else, this is where we want you to end up. How you end up there, there's some wiggle room on how you end up there. We don't want to prescribe how you actually make the sausage. We just want to make sure the sausage tastes good. And so if we learn how to write that and we can codify that in standards, it makes it easier for us to put, reference to standard in our contract language and hopefully lighten some of the contracting burden going forward. We won't be able to do it 100%, but if that can get us 70, 80% of the way there, then I'm sure every COTAR in here would appreciate that.
I think that we sometimes don't do a good job at contract writing to where you can drive a bus through contracts. For example, if the White House is saying you need to get an SBOM or an SBOM needs to be delivered. Okay, we got the minimum elements out of NTIA, got it. That should be written into requirements by the PMO, so then the acquisition specialist can annotate that to the contract, right? But what is the outcome, like you were talking about, that you expect? Because if you don't annotate it appropriately, you're not going to get the information that you need. So if you look at it as like a wheel of communications, that SBOM has many homes that it can go to, like incident response, because you need to know this about the software. Licensing, you need to know that the license is good and it actually has one. It's not expired. Acquisitions, what do they do with the SBOM? How is that SBOM tracked? So there are a lot of different elements that you need to account for in an SBOM, and to get that language needs to be written to account for all of those items, but that's not being done, right? They're just saying, provide me an SBOM, then you get a PDF, and it's not machine readable where you can use this PDX or Cyclone DX to read it. But we're seeing that across many different things, not just SBOM. We're seeing issues in cloud. We went through the process of writing a lot of cloud language, DevSecOps language, and SBOM language, because people don't see it yet. We want to give them a head start. Understanding DFAR updates, FAR updates, they're probably not going to hit these areas that need to be hit. So we're pushing forward as if they're not, to provide that guidance to them so they have better language in their acquisitions and they can account for those.
So from the GSA perspective, so first of all, the FAR already has provisions, the security requirements, right? And some of them, the FAR is being revised right now, obviously to include, with so many regulations and executive orders, et cetera, in place right now. And I've mentioned before, as far as our marketplace, as we mature, process of integrating cyber supply chain in our marketplace, obviously, the contracts, the base contract, would have to be revised at some point, right? To include some of the requirements from, for vendors. And that's one of the values we add to our customer agencies that buy from us, is the fact that we already have a contract. And for some of those that might need more security, obviously through the task order, you can require more security. But the base contract will, at some point, as we mature, will include some of the provisions, like probably SBOM, and also, some of the cybersecurity requirements, maybe security supply chain plan, and et cetera. So,
but to demerit, okay, so to your point, on the contract language, and I hope I don't forget what I was about to say. I think that I think I'm having a CRS moment.
It'll come around, right?
You know what CRS means?
Can I throw something in?
Can't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a piece when you was referring to the SBOMs, and I was wondering, I guess when I was saying outcome oriented language, if we can, what we really want to know is the who, we want to know the provenance, we want to know the integrity of the equipment that we're buying. We're kind of walking and say, hey, give me an SBOM, and then you're going to receive this package, and you're going to okay, all right, you've satisfied the requirement. Now I got to go figure out, is this a nested SBOM? Do I got to go and figure out what format it is? Now I got to build a whole ecosystem. I might even have to outsource people to process my SBOMs, right? So If we can get to the point to say, look, I need to make sure that I maintain a certain understanding of who the suppliers are, and I need understanding, a certain level of assurance for the actual equipment or things that I'm buying. Because you got supply chains, you have supplier chains, and because of our vendor, diversity missions, we don't want to just keep going to the same folks. And when we go to the same folks, then we find out we're leaving out the small businesses. And so at some point, we got to find that there's got to be an approach where we are not so prescriptive, because every time we choose one path, we're going to realize there's a reason why we shouldn't do it. So if we can find a way to talk to industry and say, look, this is where we need to be at the end of the day. We need to say, I need to know that there's no bad guys. I need to know that there's no good guys who are best friends with bad guys. And there may be some outcome, guidance that you can put into your language, but there needs to be a outcome driven conversation that says, I need to give you some room to figure out what's the best way for you to give me that assurance. Instead of me telling you, this is the only way by which I can be assured. And we're not going to be in the age of trusted suppliers anymore, because the moment you start saying these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, you're going to start meeting a whole lot of shell companies that got created yesterday, and we don't know who they are. And now you got to start doing a paper trail to figure out, where did this company come from? Where did they get their venture capital from? And is this from a country that of interest or concern? I mean, and so we don't want to get into that game where we're chasing, because you'll lose. I think we have to get to a point where we have an open dialogue and try to find when we walk in a room and we tell them this is our requirement and we drop it on the table like it's gospel, then we're cutting off the two-way dialogue. And I think we need to have, at least with our contracts, we need to leave some room for us to negotiate some of that territory. I think some people have some great ideas, and it'd be great if they can share them, and they may actually have something better than an SBOM and with the SPDX, maybe there's a better format that is now coming out in the open source community that we probably should take a look at. But I think
Yes.
sometimes we cut off some of those great conversations and ideas.
Yep, so you got my CRS moment. Thank you for picking.
I
me up.
was channeling.
Yes.
I was picking it up. Yeah.
All right, I want to turn to the audience, see if anybody has any questions, any additional threads or anything we want to pull on of what was already discussed. Right in the back. Oh.
Was pretty loud, but anyway, we need the mic anyway.
Let's see, this question is for Demetrius. So are you saying we need more policy?
No, not volume of policy. I think we
What's
need,
this micro policy?
we need better.
What are you
policy.
doing?
Yes, yes.
You're killing us.
And yes, I'm a policymaker along with you. So yes, and honestly, it's because of years of writing, and they've told me what the format for the policies are. And you're like, there's no way I can address all the possible outcomes with this format. And I just think we need a different format for saying, hey, if I'm buying bullets versus buying a virtualized, network function, I want to have two different approaches. I want to care and feed for them totally differently. So yeah, I think we should have something a little bit more granular, allow us to have some flexibility.
So you said it, I think, early on that we're not keeping up with technology, but as well as I know that our policy process and cycle is very lethargic and time taking. So how do we expedite that? How do we speed up the policy process? Maybe this micro policy idea is maybe it can catch on.
I mean, there's a lot of ideas out there. I mean, there's a lot of smart people. The question is, sometimes those smart people and those smart ideas don't get to the right places. So at the end of the day, it comes down to it's a struggle. It's the tension we talked about here. Before we even get to the industry, there is tension within the government, right? To just say, hey, what is important? Do we want to whatever you do for the warfighter, for example, there's a person going to say, well, we can't afford it. So the return on investment may be, cost prohibitive, but over here we might win a fight. How do you weigh those? Both of those senior leaders, they're all, top of their food chains. You can't tell one of them that they're less important than the other. So yeah, unfortunately, that's what we call bureaucracy. We have to work through some of that, and hopefully the leadership will coalesce around something, say, hey, this is really important, and we'll apply all of our resources, and then we'll engage with the right smart folks on the other side of the fence and find something that works.
I think we have a model. We did it for mobility.
Yeah.
You know, we did the federal digital government strategy. We had different working groups in different areas and we kind of like got things accelerated that way. I mean, I think that kind of doing
Yeah.
this for supply chain risk management makes a lot of sense. And then you have different categories, you know,
Yeah.
micro categories. I like that. I might steal it.
Yeah, we put a lot of people out of business because mobility was a big thing. Then all of a sudden it became commoditized and it was on autopilot. So we could all go find other things to do because it got so easy.
Great.
This is Jim Payne from Secure-G. These controversies and the dialogues have always taken place during the important pivotal transitions in technology, right? So each agency has been under a mandate by OMB to come up with a zero trust architecture plan, right? Many agencies are kind of struggling to find that plan. How does that affect, what are you saying to your community of interest about 5G and how it will be ready for the zero trust architecture audit that OMB is actually saying we're going to do per agency?
Is that for me? Okay. Okay, there's a technical conversation. There's a probably more strategic / political conversation about that. One is you go out and buy something with zero trust baked in, or do you design? You know, we're going to get to a point where we can start saying, what does zero trust look like in an integrated system? Typically, you buy a product and say, hey, is zero trust enabled? And here, the entire product is zero trust. But you got to put it somewhere. It's going to talk to something. It's going to interact with data. And once it touches something else, then you don't know if that zero trust architecture is going to integrate well with the other zero trust architectures. And so what we typically don't have is a underlying concept of how does this work in a multi-stack, multi-vendor ecosystem. Everyone's kind of walk out and say, this is my interpretation of zero trust. And when we start talking about networks, we're talking layer 1 through layer 7 of a technology stack. We need to start, and within a particular layer, you're going to have multiple vendors with multiple solutions. And at some point, you can't be sure that everyone's going to, and if you build zero trust in a legalistic way, it's going to incur a lot of performance. And it's going to make this thing a bear and no one wants to touch it. And so we have to find I hate to say it again, but we have to find a sweet spot. We're not going to have 100% of a zero trust architecture in every aspect of our solutions. But we have to figure out where the critical points, right? There's got to be critical areas of a system where we can say this piece needs to have access controlled, coming in and out data. I need to know who's touching it. But there's going to be a level when you get smaller and smaller components where that's going to be impractical. And so we need to have conversations. I hate to say it, there's no fast answer to a lot of these things. Some of these have to be like, all right, let's rip open this thing and let's step through and figure out where does it make sense and where it doesn't make sense. But to go in with a blanket, zero trust at every level of the stack, every component needs to authenticate to the next component next to it. It's going to create a monster that we don't want to maintain. That's just my opinion. Sorry.
Zero Sen, my question is following ZTA, trust but verify. If you look at a mobile ecosystem, we have equipment, traditional vendors out there, which we trust. But should we be doing more from a trust but verify? We take their word for who their ecosystem is from a supply chain, but at the same time, we do our independent verification and validation before we use that, install that in our systems.
Yes. I mean, to me, that's actually, I don't think we have a choice. I think the cyber folks in the cyber community, and I have one foot in the cyber community, they're not going to let you have that's not going to be a discussion. I think that's the starting point. The question is, when do we need to do more than that? So if that's the floor, we need to have conversations as to when do we need to do more than trust but verify.
So do we know what enough looks like yet?
Honestly, yes. I think it's the point where you can get the most stuff for the least amount of money and no one dies and no one gets fired. There's a knee in the curve. I know it's a small, it's a really small dot, but there's a curve and there's a knee in that curve. And if you can find a way to balance cost, schedule, performance from the PM folks and the cybersecurity requirements from over here, and you don't end up on a headline on a newspaper saying, hey, another solar wins because the government didn't do X, Y, and Z. I think that's considered a win.
I think when I hear trust but verify, obviously you should understand this risk you're willing to accept. So to me, that's when you talk about when is enough, you have to understand that risk. Actually do your assessment. What risk am I willing to take? And this to make sure that you accomplish your mission.
Yeah, a lot of times we're in situations where it's like buying insurance. And so if you buy the best insurance and you don't get sick, then you feel like you wasted your money. And so in some ways you got to figure what is the right level of insurance for my level of my lifestyle, right? If I live wild and crazy, I need more life insurance or more medical insurance because I'm probably going to drive myself into a tree at some point. But if I'm very conservative and I have a very slow lifestyle, I live in Iowa, God, I hope no one's from Iowa, then maybe I can get by with the lowest possible insurance plan because it's a low probability risk of me getting sick or injuring myself.
Yeah, and I just want to add, this is also, I guess, when we talk about acquisition, we mentioned that a few times, the importance of integrating your risk with your acquisition process is that the first two steps is planning and requirements, right? You have to understand before you even, what it is you're trying to get and do a, threat and vulnerability assessment to understand the security of what it is you're trying to acquire, right? And then compare that to when you finish your assessment to know whether, hey, is this meet the threshold? There's this risk, there's always going to be risk, but the risk, is it something that's acceptable? Or if it's not acceptable, can I mitigate, is there a way I can mitigate this risk? If you can mitigate the risk, then fine. Can I share the risk or, et cetera? And at some point you may, share the risk, mitigate the risk, accept the risk, or decide to totally or decide that the product is not good for you as far as security. So there's just so many considerations that you must take. And that's when we say enough, that's really, because what's enough for me, depending on your network, may not be enough security for you, so it differs for different agencies, for organizations, different thresholds.
All right.
Got a question back here? I think we're down to our last question, but go ahead. It's very important. Make it no pressure or anything.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, Nelson Whistle. My question for you, since we're talking about strategization and endpoints and future planning, how do we get our agencies to not forget mobile endpoint and put it on a back burner when thinking about future planning and when thinking about how to protect the cloud and just architecture in general moving forward?
That's a big question. Is that a mobile endpoint security question? Yeah. Okay. Moving forward towards zero trust actually, I kind of think that they work together. I mean, if you depend on how you build it, I mean, I'm sitting there thinking that mobile endpoints are going to change. Like right now, we just think the endpoints are going to be smartphones and tablets all the time. But I'm thinking not too far down the road, 2, 3 years down the road, we're talking about smart glasses in the AR, VR communities. We have a lot of different endpoints. Right now, those AR, VRs are tethered to a laptop, desktop today, but pretty soon we're going to have, them plugged directly into a cellular network or Wi-Fi or something to that effect. You're going to have IoT eventually going to get off the ground. I'm trying, hoping, wishing, praying it's in the next year or two. And that's going to introduce a whole bunch of endpoints, which are going to have different levels of security built in, right? So we're going to have to sort of change our view of what a mobile endpoint is, and which means that when you mention zero trust, we need to treat every endpoint as high risk. That's really, I mean, I hate to say it, users are really the biggest threat. and once we get into the network, we probably have some more control, but we don't know what in the world is happening on that endpoint. So whether it's a dumb sensor that's just checking heat or IR, or if it's something as on high end as some type of drone that's going around and about to execute a kill mission. I think everywhere in that spectrum, we need to treat those endpoints as, pretty much almost, hate to say it, but treat them as high risk, and you have to do that trust, but where does zero go? Trust but verifying with the type of approach. And especially we're going to get into, and since we're talking 5G, we're going to have devices talking directly to devices. And so now we got a whole nother security posture to deal with where you can have, UAVs or drones colluding with each other, and the AI between them are going to make decisions as to whether we should, abort or we should engage. And we're totally out of the loop. We got to sit back and just see what happens. So yeah, we're going to have a lot more work to do ahead of us. And the reason why we have to keep up is because if we stay too far behind, we're going to see other folks, and whether other agencies, other countries, we're going to see them use it against us. And so it's probably in our benefit to, at least if we're not using it, we have to be tracking it, understand what the capability sets are that's out there. And I agree, we have to secure it, but we don't want to get to the point where, like we said earlier, we don't want to lock things down to the point where your GFE phone or your GFE device or IoT device, you can't use a camera because Brian said thou shalt not, use camera on this network. We have to find more innovative ways to try to, take advantage of what's happening on the, we call it the UE, but on the endpoint side of the architecture.
Goes back to policy.
Right.
I think that we are looking at it. It is on the map. You probably don't see it as much because honestly, you've got the OMB memos, all of them that have come out over the last 2 years. You got the EO that we're still trying to answer. You've got incidents that we're still trying to recover from, Log4j, SolarWinds, Colonial Pipelines. I mean, all of that stuff is really starting to, take the headlines. You have the GAO report, 21-171. People are, looking at, how they're scoring against FISMA, CISA BODs, and the ones that are coming out. So I think it's there. I believe it is. It's just not, it's not as visible probably as it should be. But that's a good point.
All right, I believe we're out of time. So thank you so much. This was great. And thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing that. Great job, Amy, everybody else. And Naki, we do have like this working group that you're chair of at ATARC. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, Mike Scott. So I chaired the supply chain risk management working group in ATARC. Our goal is to provide information through events targeted at federal government agencies and those of the vendor community. So we try to provide information on a lot of activities going on in the government today to help with some of the things we're talking about now, actually. For example, we have the next event on SBOM coming up, and they're also going to be having an event on 889, and we've had several events in the past that were very informative. So if you look on the ATARC website, you can see a series of events, including the events from my working group. And he was there last year, did a great job. So so
thanks for that. And we got Nicole back there. She just told me she thinks she's doing a great job today. She's one of those that needs self-affirmation from herself. So, but she's doing a great job for us, and let her know she's managing all these working groups. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to Jason and the team. Thank you, Christian. It's great to see you, man. Good to see you, and good to see all of our old friends. And thank you again, Now Secure and Google.
Yeah.
And what's our next event? Our last event? Our next event. Workforce Transformation Breakfast Summit. It's going to be next month. That'll be good. Are you speaking there, Jason? We're going to really shorten the panels and add as many people as we can to your panels. Yeah. Jason hates the short form. And thanks again to CareSoft. This has been a great partnership. CareSoft helps us with the AV. It saves us a lot of money that we can put in our programs. And we had some really great government on the, and press on the hybrid format for people that are outside the area. Thank you all. Have a good day. Good rest of the day.